Good evening, everyone. It is July 28th, a few minutes after 7:30, since my watch stopped a few minutes ago. And got my gavel happening. Sorry, Karen. I scared the village manager right there. Finally got my gavel to use, so I'm using it.
We're shocking, but
I'm not-
that was good. You were good. That was
Okay, we're going to do the pledge first. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I didn't realize it was going to be that noisy. I'll get better at it. But thank you all, and we have,
Mayor, I will be
anybody is, thank you.
for the special meeting.
Thank
Let
you.
me take attendance first. Trustee Fritsche.
Present.
Trustee White.
Present.
Trustee Lopez.
Present.
Deputy Mayor Quezada.
Present.
Mayor Levin.
Present.
Village Board resolutions. Resolution of the Board of Trustees of the Village of Ossining authorizing submission of application for local government efficiency grant for consolidation of Ossining's firehouses. Whereas the village, in partnership with the town of Ossining and support from the Ossining Fire Department, desires to study a potential consolidation of Ossining's firehouse facilities for the purposes of improved safety and efficiency. And whereas the local government efficiency program under the New York State Department of State has been identified as appropriate to fund such project, and whereas up to $12,500 is available per municipal partner with a 50% required match, and whereas cost estimates to retain a qualified consultant for the work have been obtained in the amount of $37,500. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby authorizes the village manager to file an application for a local government efficiency grant through the New York State Department of State in an amount not to exceed $18,750, and upon the funding of said amount, commits to provide matching funds, the remainder of which will be funded by the town of Ossining. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Comments? Everybody's good?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Do we have a motion to adjourn the special meeting and to go into work session?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We are now into work session.
Okay, thank you, Corporation Counsel. I guess you are,
Acting clerk for a little while.
yes, I think that worked out just fine. Okay, so can we go through our usual, which is to hear any announcements that the trustees have for the public? Shall I start from my right with Trustee White?
Yeah, I have a couple. This Saturday is going to be a busy day. Can you hear me okay through my mask? I just want to say I'm wearing a mask inside now again, just as a precaution. I don't mind wearing masks. I like covering half my face, so it's not a problem. Saves on lipstick. So on Saturday at Nelson Park from 11 to 4, that's July 31st, NU Builds, Community Empower Network and Uplift will host a free fitness, fun, and food event for all ages. And all activities are gratis, are complimentary. There's going to be events like the balloon toss, basketball, there'll be creative art, dancing, elder frisbee, which is what I plan to do, and kickball with the police department, salsa dancing, so it's going to be a lot of fun, raffles. So I'm going to stop by from 11 to 4. Another thing that's happening across the river that's very exciting is that our village historian, Joyce Sherrock Cole, is going to be honored by New York State Senator Elijah Reichlin Melnick. He is hosting a Heritage and History Awards and Celebration in Orangeburg at the Historical Society there. Well, he'll be honoring people in his district who work to preserve local history and culture. So that's at 1 p.m. at the Depew House in Orangeburg. And Joyce is one of 6 people who are being honored, and the others include the chief of the Ramapo Lenape tribe, a Holocaust liberator and World War II veteran, and a preservationist, so she's in good company. So Very proud of Joyce for getting this honor. And I'm going to drive across the Mario Cuomo Bridge, and is that what we call it?
Yes.
I like Tappan Zee, but whatever. And then, but, things change, life changes. And I'm going to go watch her get her award. So, that's it.
Thank you. Manny?
No announcements, Mayor.
Very quickly, I just want to say thank you to Officer Mauro Santucci, who retired after 32 years in the Ossining Police Department. Did great work. As one of the final things he did was rescuing my dog, who ran away. And after a couple hours, Officer Santucci was able to save her life, and for that I'm very grateful. But thank you for the 32 years, which matters much more than saving my dog. Thank you very much on behalf of the board and the entire community. It's a lot of service.
Sir? Okay. I'm going to make a couple, I stay local, but today I just wanted to just make sure. So there are websites for everything now. And some of it is even really good stuff. I really recommend that as we are going through the summer and the pandemic numbers have gone up, that folks tune in. Governor Cuomo has a number of websites that talk about COVID issues. We try to share information. The county has lots of information on it. The latest announcement, which we've received, is that the governor's announcing that patient-facing healthcare workers at the state-run hospitals will be required to get vaccinated for COVID-19 by Labor Day. I bring this to your attention, I didn't know we had about 130, and that all state workers will be required to get vaccinated for COVID-19 as well. There's about 130,000 employees there. I bring this to your attention because the county will also be making some decisions. This is not necessarily a private company where if the people who are on the mothership do something everybody else follows. Local municipalities make up their own laws on certain issues, not on others. It gets a little confusing. So I just suggest that folks stay tuned, not only to what the school system is doing if you have children there, but also to what the governor is doing. The website is very explicit in what they're doing. The county, and then what we will be doing in the village. I don't have any magic wand, but the numbers are going back up. It will change things. It changes things in government for both our staff and our residents and our businesses. And we'll keep everybody as informed as possible. But the easier way to do it is to simply go on government sites. There are so many of them. I was going to give you some, but the truth is there's just so many of them. All you have to do is really go to the governor's government site and just pick a website that you like. The county has them too. Just Google the county government, or Google George Latimer, Google any senator that you want. They're all going to give you this information. Find the right website for yourself, follow ours, follow on Facebook, and you'll get information straight from the horse's mouth, or another polite way to say it, from the decision makers. So something I highly recommend, because I'm getting the sense that not only will it be hospitals, not only will it be state employees, but New York City's changing what they're doing in the schools, and oftentimes the suburbs follow. I suspect it's going to come strong and hard again, and rules will keep changing. And it changes so fast that, as I think Stuart Kahan said, he gave us the number of executive orders that he had to sift through, and it's triple-digit number here. So it's just a recommendation as we go around. I also wanted to let people know that as we go in the summer and people are outdoors, I did write in my mayor's note. I try to change it up every week, not to keep it so templated. But one of the issue that we have, and I think I'm going to bring it up under new business as well, is really issues about garbage and litter and noise and leaf blowers. Quality of life issues. We are legislators. That's actually what we're supposed to be doing. We look at laws a lot. We create them. We vote on them. and budgets. Those are two big things that we do that no one else actually does except us. But quality of life issues are super important to us. They're not always the big things, but they are the things I actually get lots of emails about, because it's what affects at the local level people in their everyday life. So now that we've had some really great days, I'm getting leaf blower complaints, a couple of which were simply to say that we should have leaf blower laws. People looked them up, and then I guess somebody spoke to you and said, oh, we actually have had that since 2018. Who knew? So we do try to communicate these things. Everything's on our website. You can look it up, but you're also free to contact the BOT at bot.villageofossining.org. And I think today we're also going to discuss more of those exact issues which affect all of us every day. We don't live on an island. We live on the side of a cliff with lots and lots of people as our neighbors and businesses and residents. And I'm happy to say that there are more people walking in all over our downtown and our parks than when I first moved here, but that just means there are just more people and more things to care for. So that's it. Those were just my general announcements, and I'm turning it over to Village Manager.
So our first agenda item is a presentation from the Landlord Tenant Relations Council. And I believe we have Landlord Tenant Relations Council member Steve Dewey here to present. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to him. For those of you who don't know, Landlord Tenant Relations Council is a committee, village committee that is set up to work with landlords and tenants to resolve issues and disputes. And it is a quite valuable organization. My past life referred many things to them, so thank you. So Steve, do you have you want to start?
Great. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Good to see you all again.
Hi, Steve.
And to the various trustees that have been before you. The last time I did this presentation back in 2018. So I'd like to read the status. Hope everybody's safe and healthy. And on behalf of Julie Johnson, our new chairperson, and Althea Goodson, our vice chair, I'm glad to give this report. And if I could ask Jamie to put up the Excel spreadsheet, if you don't mind. What I've done is I put together a little idea of what's going on. Now, obviously, during COVID, we tended to slow down a little bit, which kind of surprised us. We expected to get more calls.
Excuse me, Steve.
Steve?
Steve, 1 second. Jamie, is there any way you can enlarge this? Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Let me know when you're ready. So
Yep.
we expected to get more calls, but during COVID, obviously, maybe that prevented it. So we only have, the report we're going to give you tonight only shows 13 cases, of which 10 are closed. 3 remain open, but typical of when we first started the reorganize this council, many times the tenants or the complainant themselves never follows up. They call, they send an email into the village or to Stuart Kahan, who forwards it to our council, but then they never follow up with us. But basically, the one highlight of our council now is that we did finally get our first mediation done. The mediation went quite well. It was a tenant-landlord dispute, obviously, relative to habitability issues and the cleanliness of the apartment, what have you. It was done virtually, which is what we're actually doing in the regular courts now. We're actually holding hearings and trials virtually, which is difficult, but this went quite well. So we've had our first mediation, which is kind of like the highlight, the end, that we get to it. With that, the tenant basically didn't show up so much anymore, but the matter seemed to have been resolved, and we just never heard back from the tenant after we adjourned on her behalf to continue the mediation. But that mediation is now closed, and we have to presume that the tenant and landlord are satisfied with what we did. A quick breakdown, what I did is back in 2018, when I was the chair, we did our first meeting with you, and we expected a lot of different things as to what we thought was going to be, what we're going to get at the landlord-tenant council. It's all going to be about rents, all going to be about this. And this year, only 23% went to habitability issues. And I think everybody thought we did the council, that was going to be the biggest thing. And even in 2018, that was our biggest thing, but only 33% of our cases. So when it comes to unsafe, habitable, or repair issues, only not even a quarter of our cases seem to be that issue. And just so the trustees and mayor, you know that, and that you understand, that's not the big highlight. But two of those issues we had this year, one, we actually, Ms. Johnson and Ms. Goodson actually went out to the premises and investigated the property. They went out after the mediation. We came to find out in these two habitable issues where they talk about mold and cleanliness, quite frankly, we thought maybe the tenant thought that maybe they're living in a hotel and the maid comes in and cleans up their room every day. And in both issues, they wanted the landlord to come in and clean. It's what seemed to be not a weekly basis, but tenants are also responsible for the cleanliness of their apartments. So, but nonetheless, they were repair, habitable issues. That's only a third. Big one this year, though, the increase over the last 2 years is lease issues. And I'll certainly ask any questions on that, but I don't want to go too late with this. In 2019, we have now what's called the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act. I've been teaching that to attorneys in various courts in the area here in Westchester. And we're having some issues with renewals of leases, whether or not there's more than 2 months security, that type of thing, and rent increases. And in many of these cases, we did close some of those out. Some of them were legitimate rent increases, others, we had the landlords work those matter out. There are some other issues with certain leases that include utilities, and there is a Westchester County utility allowance on certain places to allow tenants a break on certain utilities, but that is included in part of the rent. One that I thought personally was going to be the big issue under the new act was security deposits. We only got 1 or 2 of those, failure to return. That was a big issue for us. So 70% of our cases like 2 years ago, but I really thought this was going to go home, but we didn't hear too much of that. We did have a tenant versus tenant. Tenants are making too much noise upstairs. And then there was 2 other cases. One where, again, one of the security deposit cases, we never heard back from the tenant as to what happened. And compared to 2018, which is the bottom of your Excel spreadsheet there, you can see kind of the trends, but we saw an increase, basically lease issues between the landlord and tenant, and seemingly maybe the increase in rent and all that. So unless there's any questions, that's really the status. We're still working well, by the way. We want to thank the board. We have 3 brand new members with us, which brings our complement up and makes us have a quorum when we have our meetings so we can vote. I do have one caveat that Ms. Johnson asked me to bring to you. I was the initial chairman. We started this nearly 4 years ago, and Julie Johnson and Althema were with me when we started up again. According to the village charter, we cannot serve more than 2 consecutive terms, and myself, Julie, and Althema Goodson, who have about 4 years experience now, our term is up at the end of this year. And so with Rebecca Beatty, who is on board with us, but we have 3 brand new members who only came on basically in the last month. So we would encourage the board to, again, do as best you can, maybe to get us some extra personnel in here on the council so that they're ready to go going into 2022. But it will be, you'll be down to 4 people at the end of the year if we don't have some more folks. Fail to have a quorum, so we can vote and do mediations and such. It's just a thought coming into the end of the year here. All right, and that's basically the status on that. Unless there's any questions, I did have 2 other quick slides, and if I may take the time out of the mayor and trustees, I'm sure you're getting asked this, but understand, some of you may or may not know, I am an attorney in the area. My specialty is civil end, but a bulk of my clientele are landlords. And one thing that I'm very familiar with, and I'd like you to become familiar with, is what's called the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. This was a special program put in place. It was actually in place a couple of years ago. And when COVID first hit, there were monies available. This is an official matter, so I put the 2 websites. And tell any tenant, if anybody comes to ask you, that they just go on Google, go on Firefox, whatever their browser is, just type New York ERAP, E-R-A-P. One actually has you just start linking, your application is there and what have you. The tenants must qualify. Includes median area income, how much money they make, all these kinds of different things to qualify. And then the landlord has to get involved by confirming the amount of rent that's owed and confirming that the rent is owed to him. And the problem we're having is we even have tenants, landlords helping the tenants fill out the forms. Legal Services, an organization that helps to provide assistance to tenants, are helping. But many tenants are just not taking the effort to go and get the money. We are talking rents being available to pay the landlords up to 12 months. So it's a full year. It's trying to cover the entire COVID period, which started in March of 2020 last year. As well as if there's a disability or maybe an elderly tenant, they may extend it past the 12 months, 13, 14, depending on the qualifications of the tenant. If anyone, mayor, trustees, if any one of you have questions, you can certainly call my office or contact the council, LTRC, contact us, and I can get you more of that information. But it's right there on the website. New York State's done a great job. These are the last two slides there. Those are just simply the screenshots. But if tenants actually go on there, you can link on, get the application. Please be aware, money is available. I did speak with Yonkers this morning. Folks in Yonkers City actually kept the money. They didn't give it up to Albany. So Yonkers has their own E-Wrap called the Y-Wrap or the Year-Wrap. But what I found out was there was a glitch. Monies that were supposed to start coming out in July, something wasn't coded correctly with the federal government. I don't understand it. The bottom line is it does not look like monies will happen until August. So some tenants call up and complain and say, hey, I applied, Mayor, do you know what's going on? Trustees, do you know what's going on? I believe the monies hopefully will start flowing to the tenants for those that have qualified and gotten the paperwork in August. At least on behalf of my clients, I hope that happens. But, and with that, that's really the stat. I just wanted to make you aware of this emergency rental assistance program. And with that, that's the status. We thank you for your support. We love doing this. We had a great time, a really great time doing the mediation. We hope we can do more of it. We're surprised more tenants aren't contacting us about ERAP and other matters. But that's our status. And any questions you have, I'm glad to entertain.
Great, thank you very much, Steve. Appreciate it. You're the liaison, Manny?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, correct. Thank you, Steve. And it's always good to be in those meetings. I know I missed the last one. Something happened, but I will definitely be in the next one.
About your tennis record.
I only missed one. But thanks, Steve. No, it's I definitely encourage anybody in the village, either tenant or landlord, that actually take that opportunity just to, if there's no issues, great. If there's issues, great as well, because I think that the group of people that we have, they're amazing. They do an excellent job. Even through COVID, they were available for anybody that needed that information. And when we do meet and there's no cases, we talked about how do we help the community? What do we need to do? How do we engage them even more to that? So I really appreciate all the hard work that you guys do. I really don't have any questions. I think the presentation speaks for itself, Steve. I appreciate that. There's a lot of information, and I'm sure Kahan, the village manager, and probably Jamie and even Stuart are going to be helping out to link a lot of that information into our website as well, because I think that there's some information that sometimes we're not aware. So I do appreciate all the hard work that you guys do. So thank you. Talking about the terms, I think that's a separate conversation, and I'm not going to bring that up. I'm just going to say that should be a separate conversation that we should have.
I mean, I was part of setting up this committee, and thank you, Steve. I thought we set up the terms in a way that they were longer, so I think it's just a matter of looking at them. We did this with you, and I think Quantel Bazemore and I did it. So we'll get back to that. We do need a couple more people on there, so I think that would be helpful. Thank you, Steve. This is a very active committee in the sense that they don't take any time off. Some committees don't meet in certain months. I did speak with Chairperson Julie Johnson actually a few days ago. She really wanted to be here, but like so many volunteers, there's a work conflict, and, you know, somebody's got to pay those mortgages and the taxes that we charge everybody. So she really wanted to do this. I appreciate you jumping in her stead. I think there was an expectation with the pandemic, which is the only question I have for you is, how has this changed? Has it changed anything that we need to know about, or that we could do differently, or has there been any dramatic effect based on the pandemic? Because the general media is talking about expecting a slew of evictions, expecting, you know, a mass, you know, showing at courtrooms all over the country once things are lifted. What are you seeing on the front line from this particular committee? I'd be very interested.
Yeah, two things on that. And when this first came out, Governor Cuomo, of course, came out with the executive orders, as you well know. The courts run under the OCA, Office of Court Administration, and we have our own set of rules of what will happen. And one of the things that was put in place was known as a hardship declaration. And the reason I'm going to mention this very briefly, sorry to bore you, but the federal government has a thing known as the CDC. It's a CDC guideline. And when you go on Google or if you're talking to people around the nation, oh, Washington is saying no evictions, Washington. Some states follow the federal. New York State has a tougher an easier standard for the tenant in that if the tenant filed what was known as a hardship declaration, in other words, the courts now opened up and we started doing our landlord-tenant cases, everything was stayed until the end. Now this day is August 31st. So even though we were back in court, moving slowly, nothing was going to happen. The evictions were taking place, even though there was this big scare on the internet and what have you. The CDC, the federal, requires 5 things for a tenant. You have to show that you're the only adult. You actually apply for federal government grants. It's a tough standard for a tenant, whereas New York State, ours is easy. If I have a tenant, we file a hardship, or we say that we have a medical emergency. If I move, I believe my health is in danger, and everything stayed. And the original stay was to the end of October last year, then it was January, then it was May, now it's August. There is threats about this will be continued to September, but even the courts are running into a situation where the docketing and the courts cannot handle what's going to happen come September. So everybody's easing in. Now, add to this ERAP, and that's why I mentioned it to you. In New York City, they're treating that if a tenant is filed for the emergency rental assistance, it stays any action in their landlord-tenant matters. And I don't want to get too involved, but basically some other courts and some other attorneys are saying, if I file for emergency assistance, even though now I'm in court for the landlord-tenant action, am I stayed beyond the hardship declaration, beyond this date in August? We don't know, but generally if a landlord believes they're going to get that money, they're never going to get it again with a one lump sum of 12 or 13 months, we believe that stay will stay in effect. And it's on such a case-by-case basis right now. You have to see what's going to happen. So right now, evictions are proceeding. Again, if the tenant doesn't step up and do something, if they don't file a hardship declaration, if they just say, oh, I've been watching Google, they say no evictions are happening, and they don't show up in court. I've already had 2 evictions here in Ossining. I've had evictions elsewhere around the county in Yonkers. They will happen if the tenant doesn't step up. If the tenant files a hardship or this emergency assistance program and say, I'm getting the money, the courts are generally going to we have to hold off till August 31st, and we're going to see what comes out in September.
Right, so Steve, we've moved into an area that you're talking about yourself as a lawyer, but my question was actually for the committee. Have you seen any difference in the committee? Does the committee, is it getting a higher volume all of a sudden? Is the volume stayed the same? Are you guys expecting more volume? Because one of the goals of the updates is there's something that the committee, we heard the request for the members that we got, but is there anything else we should know about? Because you really do this once a year. Next time we see you will be about a year from now. So, and I don't mean you personally, I mean the committee updating us. So is there something we need to know? And if the answer is not really, we're moving along exactly as we would have expected. Things are okay. All is good. That's a fine answer as well. I'm just trying to get how we might be able to help.
I appreciate that. Yeah, right now, again, as I started off, I'm very surprised we aren't hearing from more tenants and or landlords on this. I believe Jamie put it up on our website. If you link, you'll find things to various how to link, how to find money, but right now we're operating as normal. We need nothing further from you on the board. We thank you. Surprised that we haven't heard more from tenants. No, we're operating like we normally are operating right now.
Thank you. Anybody else? We're good? I would just ask from a training point of view, because it's been brought up a couple of times, and Julie Johnson said the same thing with such new people, if we could, I don't know if there's any training we can send the folks to sort of get them involved more quickly and more depthly. If there's anything somebody can find, I'm sure that we can either find the budget or the time to get training for them. So that would be helpful.
We'll look into that.
Thank you.
Mayor. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Always nice to see you. Always nice to see you.
Good to see everyone. Be well, be safe.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Our next agenda item is an update on our parking study, which is now complete. If you remember, Nelson Nygaard is the consultant that we've been working with for several months now on parking and mobility study that really focuses on the Main Street area. And with that, I would like to turn this over to Tom Brown, who has been working on this with us closely and he can present the findings and the summary of this several-month study. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen and go through our presentation, and then we can have a discussion, question and answer at the end, or if you want to stop me at any point, just let me know. We can pause for discussion. Okay. So I presented to you a couple of times, and rather than rehash, largely what I presented in April has, in some form or another, become a recommendation in the final report, which the village project team has. So rather than go through what I'd already presented before, I thought what we could do is I would walk through a couple of key recommendations that I think provide a clearer picture of our approach to two of the key lots in the downtown that are always part of the parking question, as well as an overall approach that we've recommended in terms of parking management. And that way, that'll touch on a lot of the recommendations, but put them in a context where you can see how the sum, or the whole is more than the sum of its parts, hopefully, and get a clear picture of where we ended up with in the study. Following that, I will provide an update on what has been done since I presented to you last, activities as well as work products and deliverables. So, a little key recommendations. So the first area of recommendations I want to talk about are quick wins through long-term considerations for lots 5 and 6, those Main Street lots that have been a focus of not only management discussions, but also long-term opportunities for redevelopment. Obviously, highly valuable sites within your downtown in and of themselves, but also with a suitable development on those sites that would really add to the physical context of Main Street and the downtown area overall. So what we've identified specific to these lots, starting with quick wins, is starting with defining what you would like to see at these lots. And the key is not viewing these lots in isolation, where you start a conversation about, well, we want development, but we also want parking, and you're trying to squeeze everything onto lot 5 or lot 6 or the two together. Really what we talked about in April is this needs to go hand in hand with a few different sites, because there are other municipal lots that are more suited to replacement parking than these two, and to do things in a coordinated way would allow more development on these really high value sites if the parking can be arranged on, say, lots 7 or 8. So starting with defining what you want, the criteria, working toward an RFP for a joint development or public-private partnership, where you look together for a master plan to develop for multiple sites that the village owns. Another quick way, and this gets more to the management of existing resources and things that we heard in terms of real low-hanging fruit for guiding visitors to these lots as primary parking opportunities. They're convenient, they're free, they're available. Not a lot of folks understand what those lots are there for. So providing wayfinding that simplify the regulations, consistently place signs within the lots, emphasize visitor information because permit holders will figure out where to park. And we've provided detailed guidelines on wayfinding overall in an appendix to the report. And another key that actually came from the village parking team was the idea, or maybe it came from this group, was renaming the the village lots, providing names that kind of make it more intuitive to remember where your parking options are for visitors, especially repeat visitors. In terms of short-term priorities, converting these lots to exclusively visitor parking lots. Right now, it's a blend, but these are really high convenience parking locations, and that's really where you want to prioritize the visitors that are coming to your downtown to keep your businesses open and vibrant. So converting all spaces to metered parking, converting all spaces to visitor parking, enforcing meters from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m., reflective of the demand patterns, especially as evening businesses start to revive with restaurants, and find a location to replace those permanent parking spaces in other lots that are probably more suitable to that. Continuing to allow evening and overnight parking where you can accommodate that. Really no need to change that. We're really looking to support businesses that mostly operate until 8 p.m. a little later, using those lots for visitor parking capacity. So another area of the report recommendations I wanted to focus on is the concept of performance-based management. And what this is really about is defining what your key performance indicator is when you're managing downtown parking, and that is availability. You want availability of parking spaces across the downtown. So you don't want to give up on Main Street and Spring Street as always full. You don't want to give up on Lot 5 as always full. You want availability even during the peak demand times. And that's really what almost all of your management efforts are aiming towards. So defining that clearly, including linking that to how you price parking permits, short-term parking, meter rates, et cetera. And on the right on the slide is an example from San Francisco where they put this information right on the website. Not a lot of public constituents are eager to read policy on your website, but people are interested in knowing why they have to pay for parking. A lot of people don't understand it. This makes it clear why you're charging. It's not about filling budget holes. It's not about raising revenue for anything other than maintaining customer-friendly parking in your downtown. Short-term priorities, back to lots 5 and 6. These really should be priced a little bit differently, 5, 6, and 8, in terms of daytime permits. These are the most convenient lots, so as long as you're offering permits in these lots, the idea is to charge a bit more for these lots, identifying them as downtown core lots versus standard lots, and creating a permit that could be charged at the same rate that you're charging today, but you need that downtown core permit to park in those 3 lots, offering a discount for a permit that allows you to park in those other lots, offering a cheaper parking option to offset the reduced convenience of those lots. Making sure that the discount is at least 25% to begin with is what we're recommending as an implementation to provide that incentive. So again, taking your current rate, providing a 25% discount for those non-downtown core permits. And we identified a performance monitoring plan for identifying how this is working and how you might want to adjust that rate differential if you're not seeing enough vehicles incentivized to move out of those 3 lots that do tend to fill up fastest and stay full the longest. And then similarly, looking at creating 2 tiers of metered rates to incentivize greater use of all of the metered parking, or really all of the parking in downtown. Tier 1 basically being Main Street and Spring Street, charging a bit more for the meters on those blocks, charging a bit less on the metered spaces, on all the other meter spaces in your downtown, and identifying the rest of the on-street parking that's not metered, so that people that are visiting can decide, and they know what their options are, they know what each option costs, and again, if you're achieving availability across the downtown, they can go to where they want to park and find available spaces when the pricing works the way it should. And so again, looking at, going hand in hand with that, looking toward adjusting the meter enforcement hours. So typically, these are set to 8 to 6, 9 to 5, workday hours, but really we're seeing downtown economy shift toward a midday to dinner peak. And so one of the upsides of that is you can actually shift out of the early morning period, start the meters at 10, but where you have a lot of evening uses, you really want to run those till at least 8 p.m. so that those businesses get the benefit of the turnover and the availability for folks showing up for the dinner hour. At the same time, coffee shops, dry cleaners that get a lot of quick in and out business, you can maybe keep those meters off until 10 a.m. while enforcing time limits, adding some convenience, and providing a window for folks that really like free parking. Show up when the demand is low and patronize some businesses. There's free parking at these times because we generally find that there is availability until you start to approach the late morning, midday period. Again, implementation of performance monitoring, start with a 25% rate differential between the 2 zones and monitor for availability during peak time. And we've identified here and in the performance monitoring plan, what you're really after is about 10 to 20% of spaces available on each block most of the time throughout the downtown. And so if you're seeing that, your pricing is probably about right. If you're seeing a lot less than that consistently, you may want to adjust your rates upward or discount alternatives elsewhere. Now, in terms of what has changed since April, one thing that we did do, we held a pop-up at the farmers market, providing information for folks that were visiting one of the first reopenings. The farmers market that was fully open, pretty well populated. We staffed some tents and tables, provided information in Spanish and English, had staff there that spoke Spanish and English to engage folks who stopped by. We also held 2 virtual open houses where we went through the presentation that you all saw pretty much in April. Again, one in Spanish, one in English, and well publicized and available to everyone via Zoom. Some images from the farmers market pop-up, and you can see the boards there where we outlined some details on all of the recommendations in the final report. We were there with staff to explain anything, ask questions, and to talk with folks. But one of the key activities was providing them with color-coded stickers where they could mark each of the recommendations based on how much they liked them, the green being the strongest, favorable, and red and orange being less favorable to dislike. One of the recommendations that we did change based on feedback from stakeholders as well as the police department was, really look like adding angled parking or converting one side of Academy Place to angled parking was sort of in the quick win category. But the more we looked at it, the more we heard about concerns from the police department about the speed and responsiveness of police vehicles exiting their parking lot onto Academy Place. This looks more like something that needs to be studied a bit further. Still a significant potential gain in parking capacity there. But in terms of short-term priorities to really focus, we really suggested that the focus be on the Route 9 study. It's looking at traffic calming, which often does include adding on-street parking, and looking at things in the same area like Academy Place, but some of those side streets looking at some of the curb cuts, there's a lot of driveways there that are either redundant, the same property has 2, 3, 4 driveway curb cuts, and they really probably don't need all of those, or they're extra wide, or it's a curb cut that's not really serving any purpose any longer. Closing those can recapture some really highly valuable on-street parking spaces. And then syncing up with the comprehensive plan that identified parking requirements for the downtown in Croton Avenue overlay districts. One of the things we had recommended was to provide, at least in downtown, and I think the Croton Avenue overlay district probably is in opportunity category, is to stick with standard parking requirements, because one of the things that I think is distinctive about downtown Ossining is the same residential development is as likely to attract 2-car households as it is 1-car, or in some no-car households. And it really depends on how the development is marketed and programmed in terms of which category of resident it attracts. And so what we had learned was, when a development is looking at a site and not finding that meeting the parking requirement is feasible or works out for their plans, the only real option is a waiver or a variance, and the village doesn't really get anything in return from that. So what we recommended instead is to clearly outline what you would like to see from a development that does get a reduction from the parking requirement. And starting with one thing that we find to be most effective, and it's very simple. It's called unbundling parking costs, but it basically simply means instead of I, as a new renter or new condo purchaser, getting 1 space or 2 spaces with my apartment, I choose how many parking spaces I want and I pay for them separately. It reduces my housing cost if I don't take what was going to be given to me for free. That becomes an optional cost. That is a powerful market cue for folks to say, this is an attractive condominium option because I don't have to pay for parking I'm not going to use. Or maybe I move in with 2 cars, but I find I don't use that second one, and I can save money every month by giving up that second space and just selling or giving my cousin my second car. It's a powerful incentive, and so we recommended that be a prerequisite for further reductions and providing a 25% reduction of its own. Now, and further allowing up to a 50% reduction from the parking requirement if the developer also provides things like car share parking on site, shared bikes, particularly electric assist bikes, to navigate the terrain down to the rail station. So incentivizing folks to get, if they're commuting into the city, this is a way to get to the train station and back with ease without a car. Similarly, contributing to shuttles that circulate between the riverfront and the downtown would be another way that you could reduce your parking requirement. Another, in terms of deliverables, one of the things that we've added since April is an action plan where for every recommendation that we've identified in the report, we've identified really how to get started on that recommendation, who the lead should be, who the partners are, key cost factors, and any other key implementation factors that some of them have arisen from conversations like this that we've had with you all, as well as the village parking team. So this is an overview of the action plan, all of the recommendations organized from quick wins to long-term opportunities. And finally, the last part of the final report is a performance monitoring plan, focusing on that performance-based management approach, but also some secondary performance indicators being identified for quick win and short-term recommendations. And then an appendix, it has been provided to the report also, where we have taken a deeper dive into some of the recommendations that really need a more thorough overview and explanation. This would include the redevelopment, an approach to redeveloping those lots with multiple sites and private partners, implementing an in lieu fee option, another way to provide relief from parking requirements in a way that the village receives something from the developer, that they can either build parking or help maintain the existing parking system as it is. Off-hour sharing of parking using pay by phone, and a detailed set of guidelines for the wayfinding recommendations. And with that, I will take questions and we can discuss. I will leave this up in case anyone wants me to go back.
Thank you. Lots to think about. Let me open, it's a work session, so we're here to work. So let's open it up for comments, questions. I'm going to start from my left this time.
Happy to go. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that presentation. A lot of that was pretty helpful to read ahead of time. I checked out the slides and it was really straightforward. So the first thing I want to say is thank you for the clarity that is there. It didn't take having to go to corporation counsel and 3 librarians and all kinds of stuff. So as a layperson, I appreciate the clarity with which you wrote this presentation. Number 2, in terms of the substance that is there, a lot of that makes sense. I think some of the potential issues that I have to do with the implementation of it and who is it that may end up winning and losing out of a more dynamic system like this. I'm particularly thinking about folks that are the least resourced in our community, and if we're incentivizing parking by having more dynamic prices, how that may hurt certain members of our community. But I'm open to looking at the data and what actually happens instead of just kind of conjecture. And as long as we have an open mind and to changing it, if we're seeing that it's having an adverse effect in the community, then I'm perfectly comfortable with that. Where I would like to hear from my colleagues is with respect to the recommendation around the pricing for parking, changing the legislation, giving folks an opportunity to opt out of parking with the condos, like that whole thing. It's connected to a topic that we've discussed on the board before around parking and development and having funds for developers to pay into instead of getting the ability to not have to have parking spots for units that they're building. So I want to name that it's not a third rail, but it's like a 2.5 rail. It's right close to it. So I would love to hear from my colleagues about whether they have any questions or thoughts there. I don't have any, but I feel like that's a thing that people here have feelings about. So I'd love to hear from my colleagues there, and those are my thoughts.
Okay. We'll take that first before. I'm being too relaxed, leaning back here. I guess, anybody want to address it, or do we want to go through other comments or questions?
I have a question. So you're recommending, so lots 5, 6, and 8 are currently free, correct, for visitors? So you're recommending they become metered? Paid parking? 5 and 6. Would that metering system, would you put meters at each space, or would you have, no, you'd have one of those systems where there's one thing, right? And you go and, like in Mount Kisco?
We'll have our app very shortly.
We'll have our app very
Yep.
shortly. Well, that's my other question, is that we have this app for that. So this is, I assume, being done in coordination with the creation of the app. So, I mean, the free lots are nice because you can just whip in there. I think that the fact that lot number 5, is that the one across from Lower Main, has been there and free has actually contributed to business success there, because people like me can just go in there and park and then go shop down there. I do that several times a week. Now, I always wondered why the streets are metered and the lots are not. I should know the answer now, being a trustee, but can you explain? I mean, so this is kind of leveling the playing field, making everything metered, right? Is that the idea?
That's exactly right. And so it sort of, it keeps people moving in those very distinct areas of parking where we need turnover most often. So that's sort of the motivation there, yes.
So instead of sitting there for 3 hours, you only sit there, because you're paying.
Yeah, you only sit there for as long as you
For as
need it.
long
And
as
if
you
you're
need it.
planning to be in the downtown for longer, you're going to park a little ways away, leaving room for people who are running in and out to be a little bit closer. That's the motivation.
Where do employees of the businesses currently park? I hear a lot about that.
That's another issue that we run into downtown with having some of the lots have permits. So that's another sort of component of this, is sort of thinking about how to rearrange where employees who do buy permits are able to park for the long term. Ideally, they would park a block or two farther away because they're going to be there for 8, 9, 10 hours. And then again, to my earlier point, leave the spots in 5 and 6 for people who are going and running to have lunch or to get a coffee or to do short-term business. So sort of rethinking where the permitted spots are in the downtown and sort of putting them in the more outlying areas, which is really only a block further. It's not like it's in the hinterland someplace. It's
How are we going to educate the public on this new program?
A big component, as Thomas mentioned, is going to be the wayfinding project, which is probably like the lowest hanging fruit. And that's something that, it's going to require some investment in terms of signage, but the amount that we can do through our social media and through our website to coordinate that wayfinding in a way that makes it very obvious to people. It's a 5-minute walk from First Village Coffee to the Aqueduct Trail or something like that. Being able to make it a little bit more intuitive, how close it is to get to all the places in our community. That's something that is going to be a coordinated effort throughout a couple of our departments, but definitely something that we're prepared to do.
Because people don't like to park like more than an inch away from where they're going. Have you noticed that?
We always go back to the example of Tarrytown, right? So folks who go to Tarrytown don't mind walking, 5, 6, 7, 8 blocks to go see a show at the music hall or to go and have dinner. It's going to require a little bit of a culture change here, but, incrementally, I think we can get there. 2 blocks is really not so bad if you're going to enjoy an afternoon in our downtown.
Now, the development of lots 5 and 6 would, of course, require replacement parking. Are we talking about parking structures behind Main and Central, or?
That has always sort of been the
Is that in this study?
A bit. So when Thomas talks about lot number 8, that's the Brandreth lot. So
Yeah.
that's the one that's directly behind the top of Main Street.
That also serves the rec center too, right?
That's 7.
that's
7 is the one
7.
that's a bit further, but right on the other side of the trail
Oh,
there.
okay.
But 8 really lends itself to structured parking in a way that 7 probably also could, but 8 is probably better suited. There are a ton of opportunities. The top layer could be exactly flush with the Aqueduct Trail so that you could have, there are a lot of opportunities that make that a very appealing site to do a
I
structured
mean, there are a
parking.
ton of moving parts to this whole thing.
That's right.
As you may have noticed. I'm sure you know that better than anybody. But it's, everything has to be thought about at once, right? Everything has to be thought about together. It's like a puzzle, it has to lock together. But are we going to do any public engagement on any of these recommendations, or how does that work?
We've done quite a bit. So Thomas sort of went through about the farmer's market. Karen was there, as was Jaime Martinez, our planner. We had incredible engagement at the farmer's
Nothing
market.
like parking to get people excited, right?
People were very engaged, and we had a lot of, you couldn't see it on all the slides here, but a lot of people who had ideas that say, hey, what about such and such a thing? And then we actually added Post-its, and it was something we got into a lot of really engaged conversations with folks who, some of which live in Ossining and spend a lot of time downtown, some of whom only come here for the farmer's market, and so they were talking to us about their experience parking here on weekends. We learned an awful lot throughout this, and then the focus groups that happened earlier in the process. So there has been a lot of engagement. We hear a lot of the same things again and again and again. And I think most of those things are things that we're going to be able to address slowly but surely through these recommendations.
So for renaming the parking lots, does it have a number, a word?
I think it should be named after all the mayors.
There we go.
Starting from the beginning.
The idea is to make them easier to find.
Figure out when that
Yeah, so if I said to you right now, parking lot 12, you'd be like, that
idea.
means nothing to me. But if I said to you, Waller Avenue, you'd be like, oh, I know exactly where to go.
But that's that's one of the things that I learned in many years back when I was doing. I did a couple ride-alongs, and some of the officers I asked, so which, they asked for us. I can't remember what it was. It was like, the parking lot on this street. I was like, okay, that makes sense. It does make sense, because I think that's what you guys, I'm talking to the captain here because he's here as well. So that's what you guys do already, as is now.
Number 7, we would consider the Leonard Street lot, and then all the police officers go by Leonard Street. We had the Brandreth lot.
Yeah.
The the Waller Avenue, at the bottom of Waller, halfway up Waller. So that is actually how we reference those
Yeah,
lots.
that makes more sense.
Yeah, and that was something, I can't remember what year, because I think it was when we did the parking stuff many years back. I actually asked Maddie to give me some of the numbers, and I was working on a project that trying to do a Google stuff, and anyway, that's what I discovered, that a lot of the lots we actually, even I call it that we can do a space, that the newest building that we have in our downtown. That was one at one some point. It was a municipal parking lot, and I can't remember what number was it, but that's an empty now. So it's not a consistent number, and I cannot remember, and I apologize for the member on the community actually mentioned. It's like we should name this instead of having numbers.
Yeah.
And that's what I brought up at the board a while back, that we should do that instead. So.
Yep. Were you done?
Oh,
Nina?
yes. Sorry.
Did you have
I was
some?
musing.
I do. I want to answer what Omar asked before in regards to waiver and different waivers and stuff like that. But before that, before I answer that question, I do want to bring something up. Tom, excellent work. I really enjoyed our bi-weekly meetings in the morning. Very informative. I do appreciate all the hard work that your whole team did that. Last presentation that you guys came in front of us, at least one of my concerns, and I believe, I don't want to speak on behalf of the board, but at least one or two other members on the board had a concern in regards to, I'm going to talk about the short-term priority recommendations that you have. And there's a designated pickup drop-off zone that I felt that I do not like that concept, because we are focusing on one particular property. And I think I said that last time. I don't think we should be doing that. If we're going to be doing something like that, it should be behind that particular business. And if not, we should be looking at the other areas in our downtown to do the same thing if we're going to be addressing one issue in a particular business at that time. So I do not agree with that recommendation, even if it's a short-term recommendation. My preference, if there's a majority of the board feels, is for us to remove that recommendation at all, because part of that, it says, keeping a couple years from now, to me, I don't see the need of that. Again, if we're going to do that, we can do it in the back of that building, and do it that way. I don't think it will be need for us to do that. But anyway, so that's just one point. The other one I would like to go over, what Omar was talking about, and one of the PDFs that you have. And I'm looking at I think you may have it in there, but I'm looking at a different PDF, and talks about, it's figure 4, the recommendations of the progress fee structure and stuff like that in regards to the waivers. So that was something that we have talked about 3 years now. That it's about 3 years that we talked about. And we've been looking at this, and I think now is hopefully will be the opportunity to actually bring this in fruition in a way. And I'm in favor of this. I'm not too sure about the numbers that you have proposed. You have 1 to 5 is $5,000 per space, and then it obviously goes up 10, 20, 30, and 50,000 on here. So I'll be in favor of doing something like that, because I seen projects where they go in front of the zoning board and ask for a variance for parking. Obviously, there are occasions where the zoning board denies the variance, or before they even deny the variance, they usually go in front of the planning board and they try to get a waiver. And depending on the conditions and depending where their project is located, if they meet some criteria, they actually get a waiver, because that's part of our laws. What that is, to me, is not helping the neighborhood that the particular project it may be applying to. So I'm against that. I think a waiver system is not appropriate, and it should never happen in here. A lot of municipalities moved out of that many years back, and they started charging for parking spaces. Again, the number is irrelevant right now. We can always take the suggestions that they did, or we can come up with something different, because right now, Tom, in regards to if we're talking about because this is for a fund, just like we have a rec fund that a developer comes in and puts money into a fund, we're talking about the same concept. But if we start putting this in the piggyback portion of it to eventually help fund a parking structure at some point, a parking space and a garage does not cost $5,000. It's a little bit more than that. So I want the board to keep that in mind. So I'm definitely in support of this, and that that kind of ties back into what we passed on the comp plan, with part of the parking and things of that. So I'm happy to see that this is part of that process. So I do appreciate that. So thank you, Tom. So I'll leave it open for the rest of the boards.
I just, you're talking about reduction of fees or 25%. I'm presuming we do have a new fee schedule for these permits and everything?
We, if and when we get to that point, yes, we will. But at this point, these are just recommendations, and then probably over the next 2 years, we will be rolling out the recommendations, little by little as the board gets to work through them.
So making these lots metered, we'd be working with the app. We're not putting physical meters. So you have the advantage, if it's working, it's not working, we can say, okay, we can take that signage down and it's not metered parking anymore. So okay, that's all I have. Thanks.
Your question, though, I think, was about developers when they're doing development, and that, right?
Well, my question was about the, what was it?
Which Manny was addressing, but there's
Yeah.
like 3 different things happening. Well, there's more than 3. But there's a difference between the developer and those costs, and then the lots themselves and how we're charging for them. Those are 2
Yeah.
buckets.
Correct. And just keeping this in mind, this will only apply for a new project.
Right.
This is not for existing buildings, unless the existing buildings try to expand in the non-conforming situation. So that's when something like this will come into place. But unless Stuart, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's pretty much existing is existing. That's a non-conforming situation. It's nothing we're gonna do, and nothing we will be doing in the future. At least that's not the sense of this board. But I do want to ask the board. I want to ask the board for 2 things. Sure, one is about the parking, and the other one is obviously about the pickup and drop off. If the board is in accordance, is in agreement to keep that, or at least the majority of the board is agreement to keep that or not.
So you have 2 questions there. One's about parking.
Correct.
And the other one's about,
The
you
pickup
need to
and drop
expand.
off.
Is it the pick off and drop off, or is it 2 questions?
No. It's a
Or is it-
pickup and drop off, and one in front of one particular business.
know.
Right now.
He wants them to restructure that to being the back of the businesses, I think, right?
If
But it's
we're
not
gonna
just
be
this one.
proposed-
2
yeah,
years
no,
from now,
it-
somebody else could
exactly.
do that.
Either that or just take it
But
off.
not to be in the
Yeah.
front of the building,
Yeah, exactly.
which is on Main Street, essentially.
What's your concern about having it in front of the building?
So this is a public document. That was part of the presentation. So pretty much this pick up and drop off is going to be in front of open door. So my request and my questions last time is, if we're going to be doing this pick up and drop off in front of open door, what are we doing downtown, or what are we doing in Spring Street? What are we doing in other areas? Are we doing a pick up and drop off sections as well to allocate this, or we just serving a particular business that is part of that? So if we're going to do a pick up and drop off, I will prefer that to be away from the center of our downtown itself.
Not in front, not on Main Street.
Not on Main Street, correct.
Thank you. So I happen to agree with you on that, and I think that's something that should probably not be in there, but the option of looking at something in the back of the building.
And the pickup and drop off in the recommendations, would occupy where some parking spaces are now, so it would be off the street?
Correct.
the-
Right now, my recollection is the plan, and I don't think, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if you have that in your action plan, the diagram, but that was literally in front of the doors of open door right now, where you have at least 2 handicap spaces and couple other spaces. So we'll be losing about 3 or 4 spaces in front of I don't want to say in front of open door, our downtown.
Yeah, our recommendation was to continue to explore the costs and benefits of designating a pickup drop-off zone on Main Street or within Village Lot 8. There's pros and cons to both. Now, obviously, pickup drop-off zone anywhere near Open Door will primarily be used by them, but it wouldn't necessarily be, it wouldn't be assigned exclusive to them, and so that could be a drop-off zone, pickup drop-off zone that gets used by Uber and Lyft for people going to restaurants in the evening. I like the idea of putting that on a side street instead. You don't have a lot of that, and one of the cons of the Lot 8 option is that drivers make money by dropping people off and getting to their next ride as quickly as they can, and so you can tell them to go around the destination where they're supposed to drop people off to a lot in the back. But whether that will actually happen or not is an open question, and that's why we identified this as something to be studied with DPW and talked, stakeholders, etc. But the idea is it's not just like core, but I think downtown businesses are increasingly relying on quick pickup drop-off of passengers who are arriving by ride services. It's not just Open Door.
Thank you for that, but as we know, as a human nature itself, that will not be the case, and I can tell you that by experience right now. If you go down there during the day, that's not people either taxis, Ubers, they do that right now as is, and the people that are doing that is for Open Door. If I'm going down to the coffee shop down the street, they're not going to drop me off on the pickup drop-off ride and sort of in the center over downtown. They're going to drop me off at the coffee shop. So to me, something like this, so I'm not sure if that was, and I don't want to kind of go around the circle, but to me, it just makes no sense on this particular case. So I'm not definitely in favor to doing anything in the front on Main Street at all, on the center of any of our main streets in there. If anything, it should be in the back.
Yeah, I think we're going to move on. I think basically, Tom, it's angled parking. So it's on a 35-degree angle, and it's the entrance. And we're better off asking some certain businesses like Open Door, which is, a big partner of ours. So we love having them here, that they might rethink their main entrance to be in the back, not in the front onto Main Street. And actually, that would be rethinking traffic and mobility, and not adjusting our road system to a business, but asking the business that has a parking and an alley right next to it, like a whole walkway right there, to rethink the entrance to be on the other side. It's not a spontaneous purchase to go there. People make plans, they know exactly when they're going. It's not a restaurant or an ice cream parlor or a coffee shop. And so I would rethink that conversation rather than the way this has been approached. So I agree with you. And I also think it's just a bad spot in our village to have that. The theory of creating an Uber stop the way Yankee Stadium has or the airports have, while a nice idea, that's not actually what's going to happen in a village, because the traffic is not busy at all times. It is actually congested at very specific times, and they're going to drop people off wherever they see a little spot, and people jump out and they're on to the next thing. So I don't think you're going to accomplish what you want to, in my opinion, and I'm not an expert in it, so, our job isn't to be experts. Our job is that we live here and we sort of know our community, and we're just where the rubber meets the road, and excuse the pun, but it's what we see and what we know. We don't necessarily have to prove everything we're saying, just sort of doesn't feel like that would work. As for all of these machinations about charging, which I think is where you were going, in theory, seems to work for me. Where I think the problem arises is theory to practice. So the practical issues with parking and what people say they have and the data behind it simply doesn't line up. So whenever you go to a building that tells you if you do X, Y, or Z, depending on how many cars you have, whatever the cheapest thing is exactly the number of cars I have. And the number of cars I have changes. And when you have large rental buildings versus condos and co-ops, statistically, it doesn't mean that it's always this way. People tend to be more transient. Their cars aren't necessarily registered even to be in Ossining. So there isn't real data. There's like a lot of talk and a few focus groups. There's not real great data about the fact that people have no cars or one car or 3 cars or high school kids with cars or commercial vans they use as cars, and we can go on forever. So from the theory to practical measures, I have an issue. In theory, I like it. It's just that I'm not sure the practice. But where it falls for me, and this is really the problem I have, Omar, with it, I love the theory. I mean, it seems right. And if you're concerned about affordability, it actually gives you the opportunity to say, except for this group, right? Except for newly married couples, right? Because they're starting out their life, or senior citizens, or vets, or whatever. You could put any category, or people with certain income. You could really create your category, and you have the flexibility that if our village changes in 10 years, you just have to redefine. You don't have to change parking lines and contracts, because we have some buildings that seemed good 40 years ago in how they set up parking and really the mobility, but now, 40 years later, are really pretty disastrous and not manageable. So I think in theory, it's actually a very good idea. Who enforces all this stuff? You know, like, who manages that I had 1 car when I told you I had 1 car? Now I have 3 cars because my 9-year-old kids are now 19 and they work for Uber and they need to have their car here. Like, we do not do a great job enforcing, and I have sort of a whole list of things that we do not do a great job enforcing. It isn't a finger-pointing exercise, it's an economic exercise. We could be the best enforcement village across every category in the United States if we hired enough personnel at the right price. If we had 100 people out there doing code enforcement, we would be the best in Westchester County. It's expensive. And so it is about number of people and amount of money that you're willing to do to go back a year later and say, well, these people only have 1 car. Well, really, they don't. A, they lied, or B, they now have 2. They were honest when they started. So I don't know how you go from the theory to practice, because in theory, I love it. So I am not on the fence on it. I just think that great study. Not sure how it would be executed. So how it gets executed, and more importantly, who manages the enforcement of all these rules? I love the app for that reason, because one person sitting an iPhone, it can manage a lot of stuff here, but that isn't the case with all of this rules about development, redevelopment, expanded development, reduction development, etc. So I'm like not on the fence. I just don't see who's managing all this without hiring yet more personnel over a long period of time. So for me, it's like this sort of balance of what might work. So I'm looking forward to more, but I'm simply stating a concern. So I can't say I support this. I'm looking at you because I know you're working with Tom on it. I can't support it because I'm not feeling like where's the execution, and what are we going to do? Are we going to have code enforcement enforce things? Are we going to have more cops enforcing things? Are we buying more apps and platforms? You know, like all of those pieces
Are
are
we
there to
talking
come.
about, I'm just losing a little bit of the thread. So when for the bigger apartment buildings, you need to register your cars. So they do track. So if you were to redevelop Market Square, say, you would have you would, unless the person was parking a car someplace completely different, you would, people register their cars. So
Why?
What?
Why would they need to register their
Because the
cars?
buildings require it because they provide parking. So if they were to provide parking, so when you live at Harbor Square, you're afforded,
No, you're not forced, exactly in Harbor Square. You say you have one car, and then you take
No,
your
no,
second
you-
car
you
and you
pay
park
for-
it somewhere else.
you pay for the parking. So if you're paying for the parking, like you're paying for that parking, we have no way of knowing if somebody owns a car and they're parking it, somewhere else, but that doesn't seem to be the case. So most apartment buildings, even working at IFCA, we knew how many cars each tenant had on the property, whether or not we had off-street parking or not, because they would register for off-street parking tags, and we would document that. So there is a way to do that, and a lot of the onus is on the, when you're talking about the larger development, that is not enormously difficult to do, and I think we probably have pretty good data on a lot of the buildings and how many cars people have. So there is an onus on because typically parking is, there's a fee for parking, or a certain number of parking spaces you're allowed with an apartment building. So I think that there are ways to do this, and I think that this is actually something that has been implemented successfully. I think, too, that this is a study with recommendations, so I don't think we really have to approve or endorse anything right now. That we'll get to the,
Yeah.
we'll get to the point where we can really think, too, because you raised some, other good details if people are, I don't know how you find out if somebody has a car and they're parking it somewhere else, and that's something we'd have to get a better handle on. I think that with the digital, the license plate readers, that's actually a good way to get, we can get more data that way too. So as we go forward, and I think Maddie made a good point, that we're looking at implementing, maybe the quick wins and the low-hanging fruit more quickly, and then really some of these other issues really are much more involved, separate work sessions in and of themselves.
So the purpose of today's meeting was an update and a question for what pieces don't sit right and what pieces sort of sit right and what pieces are like, okay. Thank you for the update. We see you're working on it. It's heading down the right path. It's maybe not a third rail, maybe it is a third rail, but I think I'm walking out, one is an objection to one piece. And I guess what just because I know how you look at things, I feel like you're saying, I'm sort of informing you now, so I don't want to get an update in 6 months that still has this in it, is what I hear you saying when you said I'm not in agreement with it. That's more of a process to a presentation kind of scenario that we've been through, where we might think we're saying something, says, yeah, we don't really like this in majority, so take it out. We don't want to see it in this anymore. I thought you were going down that path, and only because we've worked together a long time, not because you actually said it. So I want to make sure that Thomas understands it too, that there's a couple of things that were said here on two things. That was one. What was the other one, Bob? That one was the zone. There was another one.
Well, this is the final presentation of the parking, this is the
This is-
summary of the parking study. So when we go to develop recommendations, then really it will be staff developing recommendations based on the study. We certainly will take into consideration, we're taking notes, what's heard here on things that would be more priorities for the board and things the board's more interested in. So the only way something that would come up is if it came up at because we were, there was public, input that you would receive, or the board would change its position on something.
So I just want to be clear what the desired outcome is. There was one question I had, which I forgot to ask. The curb cut. Thomas, you said something about eliminating curb cuts that aren't being used. Is that something that you said?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. First time I'm hearing it, like, super great, because this is exactly why we have studies, like you may be thinking something that I never thought of, and had you not brought it up, I would not have thought of. So I am all for understanding a little bit more about that. I don't know if it has to be done tonight, but anytime we have things that just sort of have become things we've gotten used to, and want to take the opportunity during a study to say, why do we still need this here? And if we don't, divest it the heck out so that, fill up the curb, spots created, whatever, however. So I wanted to point out that that's the first time I've heard that. I very much appreciate that being brought to our attention, and I have zero opinion about it. I just wanted to bring it to the light that it's, in case it ran over us, that I appreciate that idea.
Mayor, to answer your question, that yes, you definitely know me for working together. That's exactly what I was alluding to, because the same thing, something similar to that effect, we did that for the comp plan. It was obviously recommendations that future boards may or may not do. To me, if the majority of the board feels that this is something that we should not be looking into in the next 2 years or in the future, I will prefer, I understand this is the final draft presented to us. I will prefer my recommendation or my ask is to that part to be removed of the final product that the staff will be working in the next 2 years. And yes, just to kind of piggyback and your question and something that Tom brought up, that's something that we observe, especially in Academy. When we were walking down, there's a lot of curves, and I asked Jaime to look into some of the site plans as well at that time, and unfortunately some of that stuff. So, and Paul was there. So, again, that's something that we should definitely look into it. And obviously, that's something that I think homeowners should be involved as well. Things of that nature. I think that's something that hopefully we'll be able to take and talk to them and try to figure out what's the best way to do it. So my feeling is they don't need those big curve cuts, not just in that area, but there's a couple other spots too. So, but thank you.
Great. Super.
Will this report be posted on the website?
Yes, all this information is public, so yes.
Okay. I recommend people read it.
It's really fascinating stuff, and I just want to make sure I'm picking up on the vibe. It sounds like, and to the mayor's point about who's going to enforce all these things, all the recommendations that Nelson Nygaard and the team has made about ways to better manage municipal parking, that's something that we have the assets now, and that we're not adding, right? So it sounds to me like, aside from the pickup drop-off, which I know that we've been back and forth about 1,000,000 times about different ways to do it, that the primary concern that's been shared this evening is about the recommendations coming from new development. Is that correct? So that's really where the board is taking a wait-and-see approach on things here. But everything else that has to do with management of the municipal parking we already have, for the most part, sounds like thumbs up to continue exploring. That's fair?
No,
Okay.
I think that's fair. As usual, we focus on 2 or 3 issues that may not be the most important, but they're important to us so that they're not lost.
I
But
just
yes,
want to make sure I'm picking it up right. Thank you.
picking up the vibe.
Great.
If we're all done, I wanted to say thank you again to Thomas and to Marichelle, as well as to Chief Sylvester and his team, to Jaime Martinez, to Paul Fraioli, and certainly to Deputy Mayor Casada and Trustee Fritsche. We really enjoyed the calls. As Deputy Mayor Casada said, we had very, very good dialogue, and we learned a lot from one another and about our community. So I wanted to thank Thomas again for his efforts on this project. And we will be wrapping up the grant paperwork very shortly, because if the board remembers, this was
Yep.
partially paid for by a grant from the Empire State Development Corporation. So
Great.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Thomas, and your team. Okay, you're on, Village Manager, work session.
Okay, our next topic is proposed local law number 4, towing. And tonight we have sitting in for Chief Sylvester, we have Captain Jeff Giorgio, and Stuart Kahan will be talking about towing legislation. As you know, we've talked about this a few times here during board meetings and work sessions, and we'll be reviewing legislation put forth based on those discussions.
Thank you, Captain. Hi. Folks, I've provided to you the revised proposed local law 4 of 2021, which would add a new chapter 247 on towing, delete the article in the current vehicle and traffic section dealing with removal and storage of vehicles, and amend the section with regard to enforcement of traffic tickets. I did have a discussion with Captain Giorgio earlier today with regard to one particular recommendation that he made, and it was, to be honest, just a miss on my part, which deals with the issue of when vehicles are released from impound, that there would need to be a form from the village police department after the fees are paid to the court, essentially saying this car can now be released. So that's something that can be added. That actually is under section 250-66 of the proposed code. But the proposed local law 4 that you have now is effectively a complete rewrite of the earlier proposed local law 4, and it includes, various findings. It includes new definitions. It details the requirements for the tow truck operator's permit as compared to the tow truck driver's permit. It details requirements for the tow truck operator, both in terms of the type of location, what we call an impound or storage facility that they must have. It must be gated, it must be fenced. It can be indoor or outdoor, depending on the particular location. It has to either be owned by the tow company, or it has to have a long-term lease, which is provided as part of the application process. There are extensive insurance requirements. There are requirements with regard to a hold harmless agreement in favor of the village. There are new provisions now with regard to when the storage facility must be open to the public to allow for the vehicles to be recovered, and that would now be, it's proposed Monday to Friday, 8:30 to 4:30, plus additional hours if in fact there is an arrangement made between the owner and of the facility to do just that. It will also now provide that the operators must accept, in addition to cash, they can accept debit cards or major credit cards with regard to that. So that's something else that is there that was not there before. And as I said, there was, and we also talk about the rotation lists. There is, I guess, for want of a better term, there's a regular and let's call it a heavy-duty rotation list. One based upon gross vehicle weight, which is based upon what the tow truck, essentially, an unladen tow truck can lift. So it's 10,000 or in excess, GVWR, as they call it in the biz. There is now a proposed consumer bill of rights regarding towing of disabled vehicles, and I should point out, I should have said this at the top, the local law deals solely with tows that are requested by the police. So if someone wants to make their own arrangement, they can clearly do that. But there are circumstances where, basically if it's a disabled vehicle or if the police determine it's necessary to have a tow done, that's what this deals with. That's what the lists would be. That's where this comes into play. And it only deals with within the village of Ossining. So we're not dealing with the town outside. We're not dealing with Village of Briarcliff Manor. These are tow companies within the village that tow within the village. So again, that's where that is. As I noted toward the end, we do have some proposed changes with regard to, impounding vehicles, when they can be impounded, and how they get released, both with regard to if they are immobilized through the immobilization device that the department has, or if in fact they are towed. And so in both of those circumstances, and how the vehicles can be released. So that's,
Where's the section about the rotation of the calls made to the towing companies? I'm not on my own, I can't get on, but
okay,
such a long,
I apologize, ma'am, I
no,
have
it's
to look. I
pretty detailed,
I
yeah.
don't have sections on the
Find it.
top of my head. The rotational on-call tow list is section 247-12, or proposed section 247-12. That's
Hold on.
the actual list.
So 47?
You said
247-12. 250 deals with impounding vehicles. That's the second part of this proposed local law.
So that's the one that is on the village website right now, correct, Stuart?
250 is now on the village's website.
That's where you were, right.
But this proposed local law should be under the village's, the Corporation Council's website is proposed local law 4.
There. I can't get the links through, so, using Manny's. Local legislation, it's the third one, no. No, the other one, go back. Local legislation, no, it's not, those are 250s.
Well, I also sent you folks the local law. I sent it to you on July the 19th. So,
Yeah, I know, we're looking it up this way, because otherwise we have to go through all the emails.
So you said local law number 4 on your website, Stuart?
that would be on the website, yes. And again, as I said, was
Yeah, I
sent on
know,
the
we're
19th.
just locating it now.
No, same.
No, it's the same thing, it's not 247, it's,
-4, you said?
Do you want a hard copy?
Do you have a hard copy, Stuart?
I do.
okay.
This is what I emailed to you, folks.
have
I'm
it
just-
No, nobody's questioning that, we just,
No,
it's
no,
very
just
long,
didn't-
we're just trying to find
Well,
that section.
I know it's long.
here as well.
Nobody's
Yeah.
arguing that.
You have a specific question that you're leading
Yeah, I want to know who's making the decisions, who the decision maker is, because that's what I got calls
In
about.
most cases, the decision maker is the chief of police or his designee.
Okay, so I like to discuss that piece, but I want to hear from other people, so I could have just asked you, I didn't know.
just a reminder, folks at home, we're having trouble hearing you.
Because I keep moving back and forth, yes, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. The question that I am asking council is the section on who makes the final decision on the rotation. And I guess the follow-up would be if somebody has an issue with that, who do they file a complaint with? Or how do they, it's not even a complaint, how do they,
There are provisions in here for
Okay.
if there are complaints and if there are issues with regard to that. I'm not, there are a number of provisions in here where the responsible party is essentially the chief or his designee with regard to both the permits, not the actual issuance of the permit,
Right.
because that's the clerk, but much of this would be through the OPD.
right. So I'm totally agnostic about who makes decisions, because this is not my wheelhouse. Oh, I can speak to you. But I'm not agnostic about people who look at the agendas and then call me and say, look, this might be problematic, and I'd like to hear your point of view on it. So, in principle, I don't like single decision makers when it comes to people's livelihoods. And what we learned, and you actually here also subbing for the chief, and we didn't have the answer, so we got it the following week. What we learned is that it's, and you were very helpful in telling us this, which is, we're talking about a lot of money here. This is not a minor business. This is not a couple of toes a month and it's a couple $100. This is a lot of money for a few towing companies. And when it comes to people's livelihoods, I mean, I'd love to have more towing companies that sign up for this. It's not, as far as I'm concerned, 10 more can participate. The more the merrier, and the more money people make, the happier I'll be. But when it comes to people's livelihoods, single decision points, from my perspective in principle, is no different than even what we do here. The village manager has to come to the board to get signatures and explain why she should sign a contract or not. There's like a whole checks and balance system. When I first read this, and this has been going on now for months, like seriously, I don't know how big of a deal it is, but when I heard how much money transacts and who gets which calls and how do you on the board actually ever know that they made a call to a towing company and nobody answered? Like, who manages all this? So I'm trying to find a way that it is not a single decision maker. And I'm looking at you because you're representing the chief. If the chief were sitting there, I'd be speaking to him. So I'd like to, I like a lot of what you wrote, but I am not comfortable, and based on feedback that I've gotten by phone calls with a single decision maker, that there has to be a second person or some checks and balance put in, if at all possible. I don't know how to get there because I'm not always about solutions. Sometimes I just state the problem. So that it is not a single person decision about, who gets which business and who doesn't get which business. And it wouldn't matter whether it was this chief of police or any chief of police. So if there are two people, if somebody signs off, if it's a police and somebody else, there needs to be, from what I'm hearing, is a checks and balance system and some sort of an audit about how this stuff was done. It's not enough to say that, Officer Levin called at 9 p.m., nobody picked up the phone, so she went to the next one. Because how do you know any of that? Right. So on one hand, exactly right. At some point, there has to be some level of trust. People sign their names. We don't all sit there with people looking over our shoulders. I sign documents. Nobody's sitting near me and saying, oh, let me make sure you're doing that. So I'm all about practical matters. That request, I don't think, is a realistic request. Having signatures, having people document what they did, when they did, what happened. So somebody can say, yeah, here's my cell phone. Yeah, nobody called me. It was easy to prove. You walk in and you say, yeah, I don't know why you say you called me, because here's my cell phone. There's no record.
Are you
Those
thinking these are
easy.
mistakes or are these conscious efforts? Is that what, I don't know
So-
what you're alluding to here.
I'm not alluding to anything. I
Okay.
am conveying, I don't allude, because I've never actually been towed in this village, so I have no personal experience. I represent the public. People see these things on the agenda. They contact me and say, I'd like you to be aware of this. I can't attend this meetings, and frankly, I'm not so crazy about attending some meetings when it comes to people's livelihoods. And I take away all of the personal discussions. He doesn't like me, she doesn't like me, and all the, let's be honest. I've been doing this for long enough to know that a lot of it is about relationships amongst people. So I take all that and I put it all away. But there is something to be thought through, and I don't have a solution. And Stuart is sort of listening to me as I'm talking, because he knows that's what he's doing, is that there shouldn't be a single person. How to prove that somebody really did make the calls? Frankly, I'm going to use a little bit of the trust effort here. People sign their names and they're police officers. They put their name on and their date, good enough for me.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I guess the piece where I'm not clear on is, so there's some situation that requires a tow, and then OPD, in this case the chief, calls the next towing company on the list, right?
Well, the dispatch
No.
would
The
be.
dispatcher, okay, the dispatcher
That's
calls
not
it.
the issue. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. Where is and all of that is automatically recorded.
Yes, the phone number dialed, the conversation had is all
Right.
through our audio log system.
So
yes.
where is the piece that's requiring trust?
Where is that recorded? And
We have an
where-
audio log system. Every phone call that comes
Right.
into headquarters is recorded.
And it's
So
kept-
what's dialed out, the exact phone number that's dialed out, the conversation that was had, all that is documented and
Kept.
it's all on file.
Okay, so
It's
somebody can look
access
that up to,
Lieutenant Zimmerman, myself, the chief, we all have access to that.
right, and you look it up, it stays there for like a year or 5 years or 3 years. Good enough. The decisioning issue that came in front of me was the decision of taking people off, and who makes that final decision? Off the list. So,
But isn't
so
that-
if I didn't make that clear, thank you for, no,
Okay,
that's
that's helpful.
cool.
It's also not a final decision because
Okay.
there is an appeal process, and the
To,
appeal
which is why I asked you, and-
appeal is to me,
okay,
and then if if they're not satisfied, they can do an Article 78.
okay, so
That's in the code.
I didn't ask, I didn't.
right,
I
so
didn't
now
know-
you open up
now
another-
that-
you open
Okay,
another
so
question.
apologies. This is why we have a conversation in a work session, because, listen, first one to admit that I may not have asked it correctly on behalf, and I don't like asking on behalf of other people. Every time somebody writes me emails, say, we have work sessions, show up, and you do. But some people don't like that, and I appreciate that, so I speak on their behalf. So I think that's the issue. So there is, as I asked before, what would be the appeal? There is an appeal. There's a, short of suing, there is, call
If
Stuart
there is a
Kahan if
suspension,
you have a,
revocation, denial,
right, so there you are.
they have, I think I forget, it's either 10 or 30 days, they can appeal in writing to the Corporation Council.
What brings them to the point of that this determination would be made?
There are a number of
Yeah.
things that could occur which could require either an operator's license or a driver's license to be suspended or revoked. Things, for example, if it turns out that there was a knowingly false statement made on their application, if they do not have appropriate insurance, or they've let it lapse.
Right, or a
if
criminal
there's a
charge
prob-
that comes up that may affect or influence the way they do business or something like that as well. Whether it's, if it's a driver and he has a DWI, that's, right, did I read that correct?
Right, if they could have a certain number of convictions, or if they have a certain number of complaints that have been sustained. Because there is a procedure here where an individual who has been towed could come in and say, they overcharged me.
Right.
Or they did this. That is another basis. If those are found to be substantiated, that can result in either suspension. Now, it's either suspension, it's suspension from the rotation list, but the real hammer is actually revocation of the permit, which can occur in certain circumstances depending on what.
But even
what the
suspension from the list, if it's like 3 months, right? It's like suspension for X number of months, correct?
It would
think
be,
it's-
yeah, there's a limit. in
That's what
terms
I
of
meant
the-
by livelihood. That significantly affects somebody's
This ultimately
livelihood for
comes
3 months.
through you.
There's no more than
Ultimately,
90.
there's an appeal to me. if
The
they want
appeal
to.
is to him, the
Right.
decision is by the chief or a chief designee, which we added last time.
Right.
Yeah, it would be investigated and then a determination would be made.
Internally with the department?
Yes.
And Stuart only gets notified if there's an appeal?
Correct, they would have to file it.
Okay.
But a person could ask for some sort of investigation and simultaneously call Stuart and say, I just asked for an investigation. I'd like you to,
I wouldn't do the appeal until the determination is ultimately made by the chief or his designee.
okay, so that's a system that we use elsewhere as well. All right. Good, so I'm okay with that, as long, I did not understand the appeal part, and this is why we have conversations. And the only other question I have has nothing to do with what's written here. It has to do with communication to the public, because all of this, honestly, did not start with this. I don't know how we got to a 14-page thing, but it started with consumers calling and saying, I don't see anything in writing that says what my rights are, what I'm supposed to pay, who tows me, when they're open. That's how all of this honestly started, and then went down this path, because in order to answer that piece, we had to understand this. So in the legislation, the consumer rights is a huge leap forward, but how we communicate this publicly, and yes, it was brought to our attention that we can't put a sign on every corner of every street of our community, but a solution to that would be appreciated. It's not necessarily your job alone, although you guys run a Facebook page, and you could periodically talk about that, and along with the many things that you do, but, and there should be a site or a sub-site for police, could
Is there
be up
anything,
there. It's a-
anything with signage on the actual tow vehicles?
Yes, there's a
some-
provision in
okay.
here as
So
to
what I
they
didn't-
have to have.
What I didn't see in there, and I don't know if it's
Oh, go ahead.
appropriate or not, if like there was the fee schedule on the truck itself. would that-
What we're
I know
doing
we-
is that they have to actually give to the
Hand it
person
over,
there,
not post it.
name of who the company is, hours, telephone contact,
Right.
and the fee schedule. So, and just the way it is here, the fees are not put into the code here. The thought was that rather make it part of the fee schedule.
Which we vote on
Which
separately.
this board can ultimately determine, rather than having to change the law each time. So, but there would be an idea that the tow operator who would have their license basically on a lanyard around would say, here's what it is, and here's what the fee is, and so that way they would know. There are a few things that are negotiable. For example, if the person wants the vehicle taken to a location outside of the village, that's a negotiated fee they've got to deal with, I think Bobby Nolan said, once I'm here to take a vehicle like to Pennsylvania. So the point is, then that's a they negotiate that. But otherwise, within the village, that's, that's a fee that can ultimately, be set, through the board, both fees for towing and fees for storage, in terms of what that is.
And I guess at any given point in time, unless it's a situation you guys deem has to be towed, got to be off the road's blocked, the operator has the option of getting their own tow.
Yes. But if that tow should be, maybe take too long in the position that they're in.
Correct, that's what I'm saying, you
then
guys make that call.
Yes.
Yeah, you got to make the call, but if it's a disabled vehicle or something like that, and,
Yeah, and they can arrange their own tow, they're off to the side of
Right,
the
right, right.
road and everything, that's no problem.
So I'm okay, I need to just know more about communications and how we do that and how it's done. And I think somebody somewhere mentioned we could use a QR code and it goes right to the site. So as you change fines and pricing, for those that have phones, which is more and more of the population, they can look that up. It's just one more piece of it. And that I don't know if I need to say it every time, but when we do stuff like that, English and Spanish, if we're going to create some signage, I feel like I shouldn't say it anymore. Like, it should just be a given, and somebody should tell me why that can't be done
And the
in those
rotations
cases.
will be updated and will be on the website and will be available at OPD. So if people
Great.
want to know who's next on the two different lists, they'll know.
Okay, much appreciated. That was what I had. Anybody else? Anybody this way?
I just want to say, Stuart, it's a hell of a law.
I might win the award of the year.
That is,
Well, I do,
that is,
I don't want
it
to,
is a masterpiece.
I want to thank many of
Certainly.
the other jurisdictions that have done a lot of
But
this.
it certainly takes the gray out of a lot of it, it's pretty straightforward.
The interesting thing is, there are a lot of municipalities that have actually recently done this, particularly Orange County. There are a lot of those towns and villages up there that have just, this was what they did in early 2021. They enacted a lot of towing legislation, and I want to, thank them, plus some of the large towns out in Suffolk, Brookhaven and those places have done that.
Yeah,
as
so in
well.
the sense of revenue generation, if you copyright the law, can you sell it to the next community that wants to,
But the next thing, folks, that ultimately would have to be decided from your end, and we've been looking at, is essentially the fees. That's really the next, thing. And I know that there've been, we did get some information from Bobby Nolan and from, one of the other companies in terms of fees and things like that. But that's something that ultimately will have to go into the schedule once this goes into effect.
Karen, you had people call you too. I mean, you get people calling, each of us get, it's sometimes the same people. Anything to add? Because I feel like we're all, I'm having a sense of agreement here on this. Anything else you want to add? I'm not forcing you, I know people call you too.
We have heard from other people. I think that some of the concerns have been pretty consistent. I do think that you'll probably have, a lot of people are interested in this, and I think there'll probably be comment during the public hearing as well.
And if someone has a question of the way something was handled, I don't hesitate to call me. So if you want to send them my way, if there's a question, I have no problem fielding it. Just send them right through.
So we will likely be receiving some comments in writing too, so we'll make
Yeah.
sure that we share those with the board
be
and
great.
that it's taken into consideration during the public hearing. So, but thank you, Captain Giorgio, as well for that.
And the issue with regard to towing, parking scofflaws is a big deal within the department. It's something that Lieutenant Damiano has been begging for. And so that will, that will also be a big help. That will be done with the assistance of the court, because they will provide essentially the list of what those vehicles are. And we're also going to get that through our folks at Passport, so that all of this will tie in together.
LPR would be big on that,
Yeah,
too. So.
some of the other things that we heard was just making sure that in doing this, that we're not inadvertently sending any limitations that would bar entry to, some of the smaller operators. And-
Yes. But, you know, the whole point of all of this is that you got to pick up the phone and call your representative and say, look, you know, unintended consequence, even if you don't use that language, say, how do I get in on this? How do I, I said, I'd like to have 10 more towing companies. It's no offense to the current ones. We talked about, I think the chief said, it's been 20 years since we've updated the laws and stuff. Probably won't do it again for 20 years, which is a good thing, but it's time to do it. So I appreciate all the work, and there was a lot of work that went into this. We've been talking about it for months, but well worth it. So I think we've covered as many bases as we're going to. Yes, everybody's,
I do have.
oh, I'm sorry. I thought I already did this side of the room. Apparently I didn't.
Sorry, thank you, Mayor. Definitely, I want to thank you, Stuart, for all the hard 25 pages long that this legislation is part of it. I don't recall seeing one that long, but I could be mistaken. Definitely the chief, captain. Special thank you for Lieutenant Damiano because he brought this over to us a couple of years back in regards to the parking. It started with that, and I think it kind of developed to something bigger and better. So I want to thank for all that stuff, all the hard work. Stuart, I do have a quick question in here. And I read it last night, and I was trying to read it today again, but I misplaced the email, but now I have it in front of me. We do not currently tow out of municipal parking lots, correct?
That is correct, I believe. Do we tow out of municipal lots, Captain?
Yes.
Okay. There we go.
We do. So is that part of here? Is this part, that should be part of this at some point? Because I don't remember seeing that in here.
We do have-
If
well, let me
did I
just go-
miss it, I apologize.
No, I don't know if you did or did not, because we do have basically, in terms of where vehicles can be towed from, that's actually under the,
I thought it was in there,
under
or
the
addressed,
impounding
it
section.
covered it.
There's a section in there in terms of basically where we can, let's see, that's the,
The only section that I saw in here is section, that's D of section 25066D. That's the only one that I saw that may refer to unauthorized removal of vehicles, but it's not clear to me unless I'm missing
just looking
something.
elsewhere, because if that's, it can certainly,
Here, I think, we're kind of down on the bottom here. Operator park any public street, public highway, portion of the
absolutely
entire
right.
width.
or any property
Any
leased by or in the possession or control of the Village of Ossining.
Yes.
What section is that one, I'm sorry?
It's 250-65A1.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right,
Got it.
saw it in there somewhere.
Read it once or twice.
And what are the situations in a vehicle that has to be towed out of the municipal parking lot? And do we have signs in our municipal parking lots?
Well, in itself, an abandoned vehicle that's been sitting there and has been tagged, that would be, we'd pull that out. If we were coming across a scoff that's coming up, we'd be pulling it out.
No, right now. When was the last time that we actually, of your recollection, that we have towed a vehicle from a municipal parking lot?
I don't know exactly, but it would probably have been an area that was posted for, like, the purpose of Market Square.
That's different, though.
So,
That's-
that's right, it's a different lot.
yeah.
So if we posted a lot for special purpose, a special use, we would. That
I
would
understand
probably
that.
be the most, I can't, off the top of my head, I don't know exactly
I understand that. No.
which one it is. but-
The reason why I'm saying that is because that that would be, I think it would be a big help when this law goes into effect, when people that have taken views and of not paying for parking tickets with the scanner system that we have to be able, you guys be able to drive by and see that and kind of flag those vehicles over depending on what that means. So that's the reason why I'm asking that. So thank you. That's it. That's all I have.
Sorry. So I like work sessions, a little less formal. Okay, I think we're good.
Mayor, if the board is okay, I'm going to make the one change that Captain Giorgio and I discussed with regard to the impound form to be for the police, so that it's in terms of the vehicle being released, that is not actually in here.
So is there going to be a specific process for that? That individual then brings a court decision to us?
What's going to
or the
happen is,
court
we actually,
satisfaction?
we have something here already with release of immobilized vehicles. What we're now going to have is for release of a towed vehicle.
Right.
Once they come to the department, what it will say is, when they come to after they get it they paid their fines or pay the bond over there.
Proof of the payment.
They will then come proof of payment to you folks. You will
They
then
get the
sign off, and then it can go to the tow company.
That's what I
That's-
thought. Okay.
And with that, if the board is okay with that, we could have a resolution next week to put this on for a public hearing.
Great.
Yes,
Wonderful.
please.
Next. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain.
Thank you, Captain.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Captain Giorgio.
Oh, my pleasure.
So the next two items, local law 9, fire hazard inspections, and proposed local law 10, third-party design professionals. These are items that we've discussed previously about having the first fire inspection free to incentivize it, but then subsidize, subsequent fire inspections charged, and then also local law 10, which would allow third-party design consultants, professionals, for, when appropriate, that to be paid by the applicant.
Thank you, Karen. Local Law 9, if the board will recall, the fee schedule was recently changed with regard to fire inspections. There is no provision currently in the code to what happens if, in fact, the person doesn't pay. And there is, because I think we've started now, it's $500 essentially on the third shot. What this basically does, similar to what we have with unpaid, cleanup fees, it will be, a bill will be sent to the owner. The owner will have 10 days to pay. The owner doesn't pay, it gets liened on the next property tax bill. So that is simply to basically allow for the recovery of what may be a fee that is simply not paid. But as the board has determined with the fee schedule, once we get past basically 2 shots to have the inspection done on that third time, either an inspection or a missed appointment, it's $500. And this would allow a means of recovering that money, if not immediately, then through the next tax bill.
I have no questions. Thank you, Stuart.
Everybody okay? Yep, that's what I thought. Dana, I think we're good? All right, let's move on.
Okay, and the next one, this board previously passed the local law which revised Chapter 91, allowing with regard to consultants' fees. This is slightly different because this is the circumstance where the building inspector may want an outside consultant to do a code review on the larger projects. We've recently done one, for example, on 78 Croton Avenue. And there's companies like ICC does this. There's another company, JHW, that does this. We send it out, and I didn't bring it with me, but the report that was issued for 78 Croton Avenue is a 26-page report, and it goes over every aspect of it. These are basically situations where it's simply too much for the building inspector to do. So it goes out to this company, and what this provides, because right now we have told different applicants this is going to be necessary, this formalizes it, that the building inspector, if he thinks it's necessary, can send it out. And the way it works is that we get a bill from the company that's going to do the review. The company, the applicant is then told, you must send a check to the village in this amount. then the code review starts. And without that code review, there will be no building permit issued. So, because what they're basically doing is they look at the entire set of plans, and they look at it from a mechanical aspect, from an electrical aspect, from a structural aspect, from an energy conservation aspect, and they will then basically say what has to be revised, what has to be changed. The one we just got back on 70A had, for example, much of it was cited based upon the 2015 code, but we now have a 2020 code. So that just has to be updated. But this is, allows for the building inspector to get that particular, what we're calling a third-party design professional review. You wouldn't see it on a one-family, you wouldn't see it on a two-family, but you would see it on, your multifamily projects, or your large commercial projects, to allow the building inspector to send this out, get the code review. And what the advantage is that these code companies, they have people who are specific for mechanical, specifically for these different areas in the review. And as I said, they then come back, and we just got earlier this week on 78, in that case, a 26-page review. I can tell you that with regard to Hudson Step, when it was done, I think we got a 45-page letter back initially, and then it got
I was going to
smaller
say
and
that,
smaller.
yeah, I was going
Okay.
to say that.
And what these companies also do is the review includes essentially a free second review based upon, if you send a revised set of plans with everything they've corrected, they'll review it a second time. They will charge for a third time, but basically you get the second time from this company. So that's what this does. So it's an analog to what we did for the consultants. This is directly for the building inspector. So it
What kind
revised
of
the
costs are we
housing code.
looking at? What's like an average, I don't know. I mean, what are they
Well, I can tell
charged
you
by?
that
How?
Hudson Step, or Hudson Crest now, was $38,000 for the code review. 78 Croton was just about $7,500. So
Is this a cost to the village or a cost to
No.
the developer?
the village pays it out of an escrow that is paid by.
Right, that was my
no
next
fee
question.
Incurred by the village.
So halfway through the project, building inspector wants to have something looked at on a level of the building. He can call, this will allow him to call for that, and whatever that fee is will be taken out of the escrow.
Correct. What he would then do is, we would contact whoever the review company is that the building inspector thinks is appropriate. They would give him back how much it would be. We advise that to the applicant, and it would be basically, paid out of escrow. Correct.
And how, like, it sounds great, but I also think about both sides of the equation. Like, sounds great, except I could see an easy form of a type of monopoly, an easy form of charging whatever you want. So who's managing sort of the costs on behalf of the consumer, not really the village, because the village isn't really paying for it? And secondly, how many of our local villages and towns use this sort of format?
The third-party design professional review, like an ICC review, is something that is frequently used, particularly on the larger projects. Right now, we've used ICC, International Code Council, to do reviews. We've also used another company recently, which we did for 70A. It's called JHW. The folks at JHW are former ICC code reviewers. The important thing to note is these folks have more certifications than just about anybody. I mean, they sent me their CVs. And I should also point out, what they do is permitted under New York code. They're not looking at it in terms of our, Chapter 162 Housing Maintenance Code, and they obviously don't write violations, but they are permitted by New York, I think it's Section 1203 of the code, to actually do these reviews. In terms of whether there are other companies out there, these are the two that I know of at this point. I don't know if there are others. And actually, I will say, when you mentioned monopoly, ICC for a long time was the only game in town. And now that we have JHW, we're able to utilize them. And I should say JHW was very helpful to us on Hudson Crest or Hudson Step, because ICC would not do a further review. These guys stepped in and actually did it and completed it, and essentially stamped the plans as complete to allow that building permit to be issued. So they were very helpful on that.
Thank you, Stuart. And just a clarification that ICC actually, they write the building codes. So they're
Right.
they're very familiar with building codes itself. So, and sort of the answer the mayor's question, there are a lot of other municipalities. I remember many years back, actually, when I did some work in Peekskill, over 15, 20 years ago, they had that system in place already. In one of the recent ones I did in Eastchester as well, they have an outside consultant review the drawings. And I'm okay with this. So I do want to ask you a question, Stuart, in regards to the legislation itself.
Right.
Because you did mention it will be at discretion of the building inspector or the designee in this.
Right.
I don't have a problem with having that. I think I want to be a little more specific on the type of projects that we're going to be sending out as part of this. And please, help me out if you don't think it's appropriate, because the reason why I'm saying that is because in other municipalities, like in Eastchester, all the drawings, it doesn't matter what they are sent out to a consultant to be reviewed. It could be a one family, it could be a multifamily. So to me, not having something specific in here, and I'm not saying that the current building inspector will do that, because I know Joe, and so I think if we can add, units 3 and above or 4 and above, or how can we do that? Because I don't want them to 10 years from now a building inspector doesn't want to review decks, let's say. So with this, by me reading this, he's allowed to send a deck review to anybody. It doesn't have to be ICC, it could be anybody. Or am I misreading this?
No,
Please.
you're not. Part of this was taken from what we did what this board did with regard to consultant reviews.
Yeah.
Because there's the consultant review also, the fact is, the planning board obviously doesn't look at a 1 or 2 family house. So that would not, but there could still be a consultant review even for something like that. The BAR could ask for a consultant review if they thought it was necessary. And it could get sent out if it had to, if for some reason. HPC would be entitled to ask for a consultant review if they thought it was necessary. If the board wants to indicate that this should not be, that it should only be, anything, 3-family and greater, or commercial, for example, that could be the exception. That could basically limit it that way. That can be done.
But commercial will fall because commercial falls under sort of in a retail store. So if I'm doing a storefront, let's say, that falls under the commercial. And sometimes that's only like 700 square feet or 500 square feet, or you're doing like something small like that. Will that be considered as part of the review as well of to be sent out? So those are sort of my concerns in a way.
There's one of 2 ways to do this. You could either do it by the type of building, you could do it by when they submit their application for a building permit, what their estimated cost is, and then you basically go, if it is above a certain number, it could be sent out. Of course, the risk you run there is that, this, Deputy Mayor, probably better than most, those numbers are not always accurate. So if they put it down. The other possibility is that it simply is an internal procedure at the building department, which is that they're not going to do it for these particular types of buildings. But it could be put in now that it is, that it's not, maybe it's over, we put over a certain square footage or something like that. I'm open to change it. I thought, because we had done this just on 70A and we did it previously on Hudson Crest, and there's no such provision in our code now.
Yes.
It was important to have something like this. If the board, however, wants to, limit it in some way in terms of what specifically the building inspector can send out, we could do it comparable to what you do now at the planning board, which is essentially anything that's not a 1 or a 2.
Because even when we did the wetlands portion of that, we put some caveats into that one as well.
It can be limited that way, and
Why
that's.
don't we do that, it'll be consistent.
That's fine.
Everything but 1 or 2 family. And I
We
think
can
that'll
be
solve it.
consistent with that, that's fine, sure.
Yeah, because even as soon as you hit a third family, you know, Stuart, it hits it kind of takes it to a different level. So
Yep.
you have to comply with different codes. You know, fire code kind of applies more to that end. You know, commercial stuff, and I guess you know, commercial falls under the same category. So I guess that should be fine as well. I would
Yeah.
be okay. You know, again, can that leave? So I don't want to deviate too much of that conversation because, you know, that sort of frees up a lot of time over a building inspector at the same time, which will be able to focus on other things that I think are needed at the
Yeah,
same
well,
time. So I
that's the
think
goal.
that's sort of the goal.
Yeah.
So.
And just because I think in the case of 70A, I think the roll of plans was about 200 pages or around, maybe even a little bit more. Hudson Crest was obviously much more. That's not, so.
Okay,
So that's why. So I can add that in, and then we could call this for public hearing also.
love it.
The board is okay.
All
Thank
of
you,
this
folks.
starts the week I'm not here. I'm loving this. This is great. All rolling along. Next, Mr. Fritsche, I think, right?
Correct.
Right.
So Trustee Fritsche has brought to our attention.
Excuse
some-
me. Does everybody want to take a little break? I feel people are getting up. Should we take a 5-minute? We're like,
Am I getting some water?
yeah, why don't we, I didn't mean to interrupt, but before
thank
we.
you.
I think
I was all
everybody can
warmed up to
stretch their
go.
legs a little bit.
I have my,
No.
I have my
I'm
hamster
getting
going and
you-
everything to
I'm
go.
getting, everybody is going to be refreshed to hear you. I just think people, I mean, my watch is broken. What do you mean it's not a good thing? It's almost 10 o'clock. I think we should get up. Yeah, I know, and my watch needs a battery. I keep looking at a watch that says 6:30 on it. Let's just take a couple of minutes, stretch your legs. I'm going to heat up some water, and we'll be right back.
We're still on camera. Oh, you're keeping him from me. You're obviously much sweeter.
Remember, that's all being recorded. I'm just going to say it again, this entire conversation.
So we all know Maddie's sweet.
Oh, okay.
The general public can know.
All
it's
right,
sweet.
thank you.
Yep, we know. You know that your audit reports are in the office too, if you'd like to get them. Should be. Maybe not.
What are we talking about? I didn't
You
bring
don't have your key? I don't have a key either, so. Anyway, sorry about that.
All right, let me get some more hot water. We'll spend 1 more minute.
Yeah, I'm gonna be doing appointments tomorrow for the interview. Yeah, everything's good. Yeah, very good.
Right, yeah. It's the ring finger. It's the ring finger. It's the ring finger. See, that's why we covered that.
are back. Trustee Fritsche, I think Village Manager DeTore was just about to say, you're on.
So I am on. So,
Oh, sorry. go ahead.
I just want to set
Preface?
you up. Yes.
Okay.
for the
So Trustee Fritsche has brought to our attention some street mobility issues on areas on Denny Street, Havel Street, Yale, even here on Croton Avenue. And since we are working on so many different mobility studies in the Route 9 road diet, it's really important that we are aware of these and get a handle on them. So thank you, Trustee Fritsche, for bringing this to everyone's attention.
well, it was my pleasure. The last mobility meeting, I just touched the tip of the iceberg as far as, I'll start with Havel Street. Havel Street, as we all know, is very tight. And I brought it to their attention that from the old Route 9, or Nolan's Body Shop, to Sabrina, should be one way going up from Highland up. That doesn't, I'm not saying from the North Highland, I'm saying from the old North Highland, from the Body Shop up.
Talking about just literally, I want to say a quarter of a block. Or
Yeah,
a block.
right, yeah, just as soon as you pull down from there up, from the Body Shop up to Sabrina, one way going up. All right? With the, also the caveat of, with this mobility, I said about timed signage being at Havel when you're coming out to a no left turn at certain times of the day. Very hazardous. Right turn only. It was well received. It's something that's going to be discussed. It also helps with pedestrian movement too, which is a big discussion in that area. Then we move down to Denny Street. Again, coming out of Denny Street would be, again, timed signage as far as no straight, going to Aqueduct, or making a left. And that would all be set up during the times of whenever, peak times. Now that brings me to Yale Avenue, which I think is the biggest challenge. I think Yale Avenue needs to be a one-way street going up. So you can come in off of Highland and you can go up to where you have to go. We all know it's a big shortcut, and it's a very hazardous street. It's not set up for what it used to be back in the days. And I believe if we limit that, so you come down to John Street, you can come down to John Street, but you can't go down Ann Street. All right, so it doesn't take those houses out of the loop. So you're really not, I think for the tributary roads that come off of Route 9 with this study, I think this is a big plus. I'm popping my peas. So that's those two streets. Now, right out here in front of Municipal Building, or just up past us, we have 6 parking spaces. I don't know if we should eliminate all 6 because of the businesses, but the top 3 would definitely put a relief from Elizabeth down on what happens there. Just the fact of trying to get trucks through there, or a bus. And with all this changes that's going to happen, that we hope is going to be better for us in the road diet, the second you bottleneck, that bottlenecks Croton Avenue every time, especially when it's peak time. If it's a bus or a tractor trailer or something come down there, people stop and it just backs up all the way down into our lovely right turn light here going up on Croton Avenue, which I'd love to see get rid of, but I guess that's a state thing. So these are the 3 my main areas of concern right now. I believe it'll help with the mobility. I believe the quality of life with driving on these streets would be much better. And, everybody's like, well, who's going to police these signages? The good people are going to do the right thing. We know what the taxis are going to do, right? But the good people are going to do the right thing. So I'm bringing it to our attention. I've brought it up in the mobility meeting. I think, Dana, you were on, right? And it's going to be explored. So I'm just bringing everybody up to what happened on that meeting, right, Maddie? That's about how we left it off.
Absolutely, yeah. So this is the road diet study with Creighton Manning, that we're sort of, considering how the four roads that Trustee Fritsche mentioned will sort of affect or be affected by, what happens on Route 9, and sort of looping it in as part of that whole conversation. And they're gonna look at it. It was well received.
Comments? Can I comment?
Comments?
Cool, yeah.
Comment away.
Let me have it.
So, first, I got a larger, more structural question. Before these changes are put into place, do we have a mechanism for engaging the people that live in those communities?
Yes, so this is, the folks from Creighton Manning are scheduled to come and present to this board sort of holistically within the next couple weeks. And so this is really just the introduction to what that entire concept is going to look like. And there will certainly be more engagement as we go about all the different intersections and how each one would be individually affected. So this is but a first step on this.
Right, and then you would enter a design phase where you'd really get into the nuts and bolts and of traffic flow and making sure that everything actually worked, and then that design would then be what's implemented.
But what I took out of that meeting was, from the guy from the state, was pedestrian, and brakes coming to roads with lines on the road, or double yellow lines. Those are big things that they look at up there. So I believe my understanding is they're going to give them an A and a B. I think it came out of that meeting, to present to the state to get okay, that looks good. So, but these are things I want to put in there, because I think, Havel Street's a hazard. Yale Avenue is a hazard. And I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, so the reason that I asked that initial larger question is because there are trade-offs to making various moves, and different, you can think of them as constituencies, I suppose, or interests are going to benefit or not given certain decisions. So you have pedestrians as one that you mentioned. Mm-hmm. You have large vehicles, which include emergency vehicles, as a second. You have commuters, or people that are just driving through those communities, and then you have the people that live in those communities. And I live very close to Yale Avenue, and it's a very narrow street. It's a two-way street. It's tough, particularly if you get a couple of SUVs trying to wiggle their way through. It's tough. So I can understand the rationale for wanting to take a look, starting with Yale Avenue here, wanting to take a look at this. And it's, these streets are not designed the way that, it's not like a grid design, or a design where if we, even if you look closer to downtown, where it's a little bit more of a grid, where if you make this street a one way, the street over could be the other way, and then it's pretty easy to go in both directions. Like next to Yale is Havel, and then there's kind of nothing next. It's kind of Dale, but it's like way down. It's like it's not as easy to just go. Well, if you can go up here and then down here, since you can't go both ways. So I'd be interested in hearing all of those details for those different kinds of constituencies, pedestrians, emergency vehicles, commuters, or people that are just driving through, and then residents that live there, for each one of these changes. And then the last thing is with Havel. Just so I'm clear on your recommendation, it's making it one way between, is it down here, just so you see it on the map, is it between
From
down
Precision
here?
Auto, or not Precision, Nolan's Auto Body. So you're going to come off South High, and you have the old Route 9, right, that next intersection. From there,
Here.
yes, from there up to Sabrina Lane.
Got it, okay. From here.
Yeah,
to
because that way you don't
Sabrina.
block off the options of people going down to Matras or wherever they go, or they go to Finnegan Place. They can come in and come out of that entrance.
Right.
You're not locking them in. You're just
Right.
locking traffic. So if I come off, I can go up to Sabrina, I can go up to the middle school, I can go up to Claremont.
Right.
All right. The buses can go up. I don't think they do though. They all
So
take
if you're,
Van Cortlandt.
let's say you're past here, let's say you're here somewhere, like north of
Jenkins Court. You come out of Jenkins Court. You got to go
Yeah.
up to Claremont Road and come back down.
Wasn't, my understanding
you're
was Havel Street was one way at one point
I never,
was it-
I
yeah,
never ever, I've been here a long
We had
time.
somebody on Havel Street, and when we were talking about it.
Well, you grew up here,
similar
so if
kind-
you don't
similar
remember.
I don't ever remember that.
Yeah.
And I've
Okay,
driven a
maybe
fire
I'm-
truck up
maybe
there
I'm
too many
mistaken.
times.
Okay.
So that's my little spiel.
I can
Any
go
other
next.
questions? Manny, you've got
Oh,
to have
no,
a
no,
question.
I have a lot of questions.
Come
but
on.
No, I'm actually in favor of those, and all those, because you and I talked about this before.
I'll write that down.
No, and so let me ask a different question in regards to, let's say we don't have this study going on right now. So fill me in, and what will be the process of us requesting something like this if we have nothing going on?
If we just wanted to move forward with it.
So I think that's.
I agree.
I think that's a good point, because I think these are things that we have to address regardless of what we do, and some of them we may be able to address sooner rather than later.
Right.
So I think the first step is we really have to have an internal meeting with Paul Fraioli, Kevin Sylvester, other relevant staff. Possibly, if we're talking about Croton Avenue, we may need to talk to DOT. We may, but I think that,
Croton Avenue is ours, though. That's ours.
oh, okay, okay.
Yes, that's ours.
Got-
Remember,
I got-
that was
gotcha,
discussed in
gotcha,
the meeting,
gotcha.
remember?
Yep. Sorry about that. And
okay.
we can look at those and look at what we can do right now, like what's the low-hanging fruit and the quick wins. We can start public engagement around that, but we really have to meet with staff, figure out a
Fine.
plan to go forward, what's doable, what's going to need more time, figure out the timing around it, and then community engagement around it, and then,
I'm good with it.
And then you have, the community engagement's important, because, oftentimes we'll sit here, obviously, you may want to take one of the vans that we have parked down by the community center, take a little ride in the area, because not everybody knows every street the way Bob may, or the way you do. Sometimes, we've learned when you actually go and look at this stuff, you see things very differently, and, come up with a recommendation.
Yeah,
So-
and I think the reason why I'm asking that question is because, look, we have a study, which I'm not taking anything away out of that study. The study to me is a study right now, maybe some implementations. We still have to go through the state approval and all this other stuff. We're talking about a process of at least a year, more or less.
yep,
Maybe more. I hope not.
maybe less.
Maybe less.
Maybe less.
So
Call
we
it a
don't know.
year.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, but I think those implementations, the critical the points that Bob brought into me is, I don't want to wait a year for something like that, because if we weren't doing the study, we'll be
We would
looking at
still
it right
need
now.
to- Yeah, so
Yeah.
I think that we can
So-
look at it, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think everybody agrees.
So, okay. So
Yeah,
I
I
just
don't-
don't want.
None of these
yeah.
changes require legislation.
Correct.
They can all be undertaken by the
Right.
village manager.
Correct.
And I'm expecting a discount from the study for solving some of these issues in advance of the study.
So we're looking at Havel Street. I just want to make sure I have Havel Street, Denny and Yale.
Correct. Denny's just signage coming
Right.
out. Yale is one-way going up. Havel's one-way going up from Nolan's Auto Body to Sabrina,
Right,
and then eliminating 3 spaces, the easternmost 3 spaces on Croton Avenue going from Elizabeth Street down. I wouldn't want to take spaces out from
Those I will want to hold off in a way for now, because those will impact some of the stuff that we're doing here. So
I think it'll help more than it'll impact.
Okay, we don't need to have this
Anyway,
conversation now.
We-
All-
we- we-
You
we
need to
can
go look at
we'll
this
look at
stuff,
this
and then you
with
all
our,
decide.
with our interim team, and we'll revert back, we'll come back to you with recommendations and a plan of action and timing.
okay,
and-
I'll prefer, like I said, I would prefer that than tying it back to something that will.
No, I think people are mostly in agreement with
Yeah, that's not-
conceptually
that's
with
not a
that, so
problem.
that's done. Next step is field trip time and recommendation time. So, and I really do recommend that we look at things, because we've been hit a little bit sometimes when some of us know every street and the timing and all that. So just a suggestion for
Yeah.
those that are
No,
going
we'll-
out there.
we'll put
So I
together
think
a
this
plan
is
for
good.
that. That's not a problem.
All righty.
I just want to throw one more on Yale. The sidewalk is so narrow, and there are poles in the sidewalk, so that if you're, which I've done, try to push a stroller, you have to go onto the sidewalk at times. Not this, but you go onto the street to get back onto the sidewalk because there's no space for, so I don't know if you have a wheelchair or whatever, I don't even know how that's, whatever, but that's another, if you do make it one way, it's maybe a
Right.
benefit, you can expand the sidewalk. And just
Correct.
another detail to throw.
Well, I mean, look, some communities put sidewalks on one side of the street in order to create a more usable sidewalk with the understanding that on the other, because you can walk across as long as the sidewalk works. It's the people who live there, because it's one group of people will now have a little bit less, because we are allowed to cut in if we wanted to for safety issues and purposes. While across the street, their neighbors benefit from having more land and less sidewalk. So everything has a lever to it, but settling sometimes in the middle isn't the solution, because you got nothing of anything, right? So, and, yeah, I think it's worth looking at pedestrian. I was going to throw in, but I don't know if it's an issue or not. You know, we keep talking about connectivity with bike lanes, and those also require space and how you park and don't. So, you know, we can't load the cart with so much that the horse is going to die trying to move it. You know, everything requires some thought and compromise, but I think the community engagement, you know, is increasingly important.
Yeah, I mean, I would add it to the list. It is a brutal hill. I've done it many times. That Yale Avenue hill, it's very steep.
Keep saying we live on the side of a cliff, essentially. If you take a helicopter ride, it's basically a cliff.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that input. We will revert with a plan of action on that.
Okay.
The next topic is marijuana legislation update. So Jamie's going to put up just a slide that we can talk from. We'd like to go over there is a timing element to this, because you know, if the board chooses to opt out of any legislation, there must be a local law drafted, a time allowing for permissive referenda, and then time to enact the law before December 31st. So we just want to talk about this, the steps, and Jamie, if you could just enlarge that a bit.
We're looking at presenter view, Jamie.
Yeah. There we go.
Thank you.
All right, so,
Yep.
okay.
Yes, I think if you go to slideshow, but then
I
just
think this is good.
swap.
It's one slide, by the way, so I think this is fine.
No, go to slideshow, it hops into a different screen.
Yeah, this is, I think we can
Okay,
read
this is
this.
fine, Jamie.
Okay, sorry for that.
So I think that we all know now that the governor signed the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, MRTA as we call it, in March. And this was related to the sale and use of cannabis. Currently, if to comply with this new law, there is absolutely nothing anybody has to do. However, as we know, some municipalities are deciding that they may want to opt out and wait. You can opt out and opt in later, but once you opt in, you can't opt out. Right now, the opt-out would be for either or both the dispensaries and/or smoking establishments or on-site use establishments. So you can, you know, you have some options in terms of the permissive referenda, but we wanted to just make sure, because ideally, we would be looking to put a local law, if a choice is made by the board to opt out, we'd really need to do the resolution at the next legislative session to open the public hearing to maintain the timing schedule, so.
You mean next week, when the mayor's
You're
not
going to
here?
be very busy, Manny. I'll be, just in case anybody didn't pick that up, I'm not here next week, so, so.
It would
It's
just
just
be
be
the
to call
resolution
for
calling
public.
for the public hearing, so,
If we decide to opt out.
if you decide to opt out.
Okay. So, what do you need from us today?
We just
Stuart?
want to, I just think it's important to, we go over this publicly so we understand what the options are as well as the timing. So again, municipalities can opt out of dispensaries and/or on-site use establishments. The board does have an option to bypass the petition process. If the board is opting out, this is subject to a permissive referenda, which means that within 30 days, petitions must be gathered that have 20% of the electors of the village as shown on the register of electors for the previous general village election. And that must be done within 30 days. Once that's done, should the petition be done and filed with the qualifying signatures, then the action must be taken in no less than 10 and no more than 60 days subsequent to that. So that really gets us pretty much to the end of the year pretty quickly.
But we also have the option as the board is to waive that petition.
Well, if you wait, what it means if you waive the.
And it automatically goes.
It automatically goes to a special election.
Okay.
That's another decision that you could do if you wanted to bring it to a special election. I think there's some consideration there based on what you think the likelihood that you would, the opposition would be to the opt-out, and that would, I think, be discovered during the public hearing portion.
So, so if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like we need a decision of what we want to do or get the temperature of the board tonight.
Right, that's why they're bringing it up. We discussed this actually.
So we
in
can,
the past, right.
but my question, and I'm sure I know the answer, we can opt in on dispensaries and opt out on lounges, but we could always opt back in on a lounge. Okay.
Correct.
Okay, so let's get the sense of the board and where we're going so that Stuart could be prepared for next week if we're going to a public hearing on this. No?
Mayor,
What
but that's,
happened?
that's only for, we open up this for public discussion. We're not
Right.
voting on
Right.
anything right now. It's just to make an,
Oh, you need to know
just
the
literally
Need to know
just
the
to
temperature
listen
of the board of what he's going to bring to us next week.
Because
Yeah.
In
No,
order
no, no,
to- in
yes.
order to call for public hearing, I have to have a law.
Right, so we've been through this before. It can't just be, let's have a public hearing on marijuana.
Right.
It has to be specific to whether we're opting, not opting in, because you don't need a public hearing for opting in. You do nothing. If we're opting out on anything, or think we might, because we may vote differently, but if we think at this moment, right now, that we may be opting out of either one or both, we have to let Stuart know, because he has to write the law that then goes to the public hearing for a point of conversation. Otherwise, there's no conversation. It's not about marijuana. It's about how we write or how Stuart puts the law together. My sense, we could have a discussion, we've had some conversation, is, and people can correct me, my sense is that we are doing nothing in relation to dispensaries, meaning that we would opt in, because doing nothing is opting in.
Correct.
Correct? Okay, so that we are leaving things as is for dispensaries. Let me start with that and see if I have that correct for this board.
Starting with dispensaries?
Yes, I'm starting with dispensaries where we would do nothing about dispensaries. Therefore, there won't be a law written for discussion because
'Cause we're not
we're
opting
leaving
out.
that.
Agreed. Okay.
Do I have agreement on this? Okay. Obviously, things could change, but this is where we're going. My other sense is that some of us, and some of us is enough, I don't even need a majority, to be honest, because we're not voting. Just the sense of the board that there are some people on this board that want to opt out of, I refer to them as lounges, I don't think that's the technical term.
Adult use social consumption sites.
Okay, there we are, adult use social
Gotta be an acronym
consumption
for that one, right?
sites, and I'm sure the acronym is probably something really interesting. That there's at least one person, and that's enough for me to then put something together, because we're not voting, that we will opt out of that. What I colloquially refer to, do I have that correct?
So what is the question?
he needs to now, if we have the temperature of that, Stuart needs to write something to open for a public hearing next week that says that the board wants to open a public hearing regarding opting out of having lounges, adult use social consumption in the village of Ossining.
Well, so I'll say, well, let me clarify, and then I'll say where I land.
Good.
So what you're saying is, you know that there's at least one person that is in favor of opting out, and so you're suggesting to Stuart that we should prepare to opt out because there's one person who's interested in opting out.
I'm suggesting that in order to have the public hearing, we could also, I think it's more than one person, but I just left it open so that when there's a public hearing, it doesn't become, well, what do you think? And what do you think? And what do you think? But rather be focused on what he writes. To me, it's enough to open a public hearing, and he needs to write something. But if people want to get more of a temperature, if there's a majority on opting out of lounges, we can have that conversation now as well. It's a public hearing. It's a public meeting. People can see
Yeah.
how we feel about
Yeah.
things. It's fine with me as well.
I'll give you my temperature.
Okay.
I don't have a problem opting out because we always have the option of opting back in.
To the lounge.
The adult use,
Social
social
consumption.
consumption.
Okay, that's one. Do you need?
So
do
I'm
you want to-
okay,
do you
I'm
want
okay with opting out at this point.
that? Okay,
Yes.
sir.
Yeah, so I think it's helpful to understand what these consumption sites are and are not. So if you look at the legislation, it says very explicitly, they are only for the consumption of cannabis. That means you can't go there and drink alcohol and consume cannabis. You can't go there and purchase cannabis. They are places that you go to consume cannabis. We also know that it's legal to consume cannabis. So anywhere that you can smoke tobacco, you can smoke cannabis. We know that you can't smoke either tobacco or cannabis in parks. So people can smoke, they can't smoke in parks. Where should they go? So conceivably, I guess, the street. They can stand on the sidewalk and consume their marijuana. As a person in this community, particularly one with children, I'd like to be able to walk down the street without having someone smoking cannabis on the sidewalk. And then if I were to turn to that person and say, "Excuse me, person, could you please not smoke your cannabis here on the sidewalk? I'm trying to walk with my kids." They'll turn to me and say, "All right, well, where should I go?" I go, "How about you smoke it at home?" And they go, "I don't want to smoke it at home. I live in an apartment building. My neighbors are complaining. I don't want to smoke it at home. It's legal for me to smoke it here on the street. I'm smoking it here on the street." Wouldn't it be nice if I had somewhere to go that it wouldn't bother you or your family, that I could go and do that? Well, that's what this would be. And the obvious retorts would be, well, what would it look like? Where would it go? The good thing is that as a municipality, just like every municipality in the state, we have the power to control time, place, and manner, so that we can say we don't want it to be near a school. We don't want it to be in this place in town. We don't want it to be going on till 3 a.m. We have full control over that. And what I've seen a lot of municipalities, not a lot, what I've seen some municipalities decide to do is say, well, we don't know what it's going to look like. Let's opt out for now, see what it looks like, and then opt in. Who are they waiting for? It's a circular logic. If everybody's waiting for everybody else, who are they waiting for? Well, they're waiting for either large cities, which are likely going to opt in to both of these things. And if you think that a small community like ours is going to look at a New York City or even a White Plains and say, well, they opted in and it's working out for them, let's opt in. You can very already easily hear, well, that's New York City, that's Yonkers, that's not Ossining. We're a different thing. So you'll never actually end up to a place where you have a comparable example of, well, they're doing it and it's working out for them, so we should do it. Until you have a municipality that's brave enough to say, let's do the logical thing. We can't not have people smoking because they can smoke. We know that even if they can't buy it in our community, let's say we opt out of dispensaries, they can not only can they go somewhere nearby, but they can get it delivered. we would rather not have people going other places to smoke and then driving back to Ossining because they can't just smoke in their own community in a place where it's not going to disrupt people. And so, well, while we could, simply opt out and then potentially opt in at some later time when some municipality that's kind of like Ossining, close enough, does it and they're successful, and then we see that there are no issues and then we choose to opt in, maybe. My contention would be look at the communities, not just like Ossining in New York State, that exact scenario, but you can actually look at communities across the country or in Canada or in, around the world, but the United States and Canada are whether it's pretty close to Ossining. And they're not on fire. They're not, these things are, in social work, it's known as harm reduction. Maybe you don't want to smoke. Totally get that, totally respect that. But this is not about, do you think marijuana is good or bad? Or do you think people should be able to have a play? Do you co-sign people going somewhere? Do you endorse that? People going somewhere to smoke, saying that that's a good thing. That's not what it's about. It's about what's going to cause the least harm, do the most good. And part of this legislation, which is also very clear, is about social justice. That the people who have been most harmed by the current legislation that we have, or I guess not current, the past legislation we've had around cannabis have been communities of color. And that's because they tend to be more policed, et cetera, et cetera. And so if we know this, if we know that the people who are most likely to be harmed by us saying, let's wait to see how it works out for other communities, are likely the most vulnerable in our community, the people who are likely to most benefit are the most vulnerable in our community because they have somewhere to go, I think that's good. I think that would be a good thing. And so what I would posit is, other communities are waiting for brave communities that are willing to step out and say, we see what's going on. We're looking, this is the way that things are moving in this state. Not hypothetically, not theoretically. You can light up right now. So let's not bury our heads in the sand, wait for someone else, so then we can figure it out. Let's do it. And so that would be my position. Let's opt in, let's do nothing.
On both. Okay.
Yes, on both. But we were talking about lounges now, but yes,
Right.
on both.
All right. Folks, any other comments?
I guess I could go, Mayor. Thank you. I could not disagree with anything that Omar just said in regards to places to smoke, because I'm seeing that right now. It's happening right now. I don't debate that is an issue in some areas because it's just people that they like that, they do that for medical reasons or for whatever reasons that they have. And some people, other people don't like that. When you're right, when you're taking your children and you walk in or you're riding and you're going to the park, because right now some people don't even obey that. They do smoke in the parks, no matter what the sign says, unless there's some enforcement. The problem that I have right now with some of the lounges situation or the adult use centers, and I'm trying to figure out how to even say this acronym, Stuart, so I'll get there at some point. I know this is common. This is not just an Ossining issue. This is a New York State, process that is common here. I think the process that I'm trying to still figure it out is in regards to both. But we're talking about lounges at this point because I think the consensus of the majority of the board is to gear to one of them. Lounges to me is a little bit difficult to understand, and maybe Omar, you can help me offline and just trying to do some research. It's like going to a bar. Sure, to me, it's like people go to a bar just to relax. Some people like to go to a bar and just drink, and there's regulations for that. Sure, you cannot drive while intoxicated, and there's ways that you can actually control that if you're driving drunk in a car. So to me, it's like how do you control portions when you smoke? And the ability of drive because you went to a location of a lounge that is a mile away from you, from where you live. So now you drove there, but now you have to drive back. To me, and I get a lot of the stuff is not in place, and I get that a lot of stuff is not going to take place right now either. So, but those are sort of the concerns that I have, the implementation portions. Looking at Colorado statics, that state passed this legislation many, many years back. So I'm just trying to figure that portion out. So I will not be in favor of putting lounges right now, even though we can control the locations of where they are or where they could be located in the future zoning legislation itself or within a map. That's sort of where I stand. Again, right now, I'm in not participation on none of those two, because we can always opt back in next year. But there's some feelings that I know that is needed in some areas. And like I said, I know it's coming, and I know that I don't, that's something that is going to be here, not just in Ossining, but in pretty much in all our communities here in Westchester and in the New York area. So I'm just trying to figure it out. What is the best approach to take something like this? That's all.
Dana? If you have comments?
I think that dispensaries are very tested. There are many, many dispensaries in this country, and more experience with them. There's just not as many lounges. There's not as much experience with them in terms of their impact. I do agree that they serve a purpose, for sure. But I do, what I think would happen if we opted out of lounges is that what would change our mind would be somebody who wants to come in and open one. That's what I think would change our, I mean, if you allow dispensaries, I would prefer people come to, just go buy their stuff and go home. But, if they want to go hang out in the lounge, I don't know. I certainly hope they don't serve alcohol as well, right?
Legal.
Huh?
Not permitted to.
Not,
Legal.
okay, good, because, yeah, that could get,
I think it's important just for people to recognize too, because there's some confusion. The on-site consumption places do not sell marijuana either. They provide a place where you can smoke or consume, because you can consume it different ways, but they don't sell alcohol or marijuana. I don't think a lot of people understand that.
I mean, it's a nice rooftop location with a river view, could be worse, right? But, sorry. I'm all in for dispensaries. I'm just, for lounges, not as all in. That's all.
But just like Bob said, pretty much, I mean, if the board decides to opt back in at some point, we can do that as well on the lounge portion. We don't have to do both of them right now, or we don't have to do, so,
You can always opt back in.
yeah.
That is a provision.
So I guess where my feeling is around this conversation is that choosing to opt out from either lounges or dispensaries is not cheap, because we know we can't roll it into a regular election. So we have to have, of course, I know there's steps between us opting out in an election, but, or a referendum, excuse me. There are steps in between, but those steps are generally free or low cost. Really, the cost comes in us having to run our own referendum. So it's not cheap. This is a topic where not everyone, but most folks are coming into it with a perspective. They feel like it's going to be something that's good or it's going to be something that's bad. I personally am not convinced that there's going to be a ton happening in the future, that if you are someone who's ardently against lounges, if you sit down and you say, do I want a consumption site in Ossining? That then seeing, well, look, Tarrytown has one or Croton has one, and there's lines around the block for theirs. Likely the kinds of reasons that you say, a quality of life, protecting the kids, the environment is going to bring in whatever. I don't necessarily see it happening. And so it could be that we say, okay, let's opt out. We go through the whole process. There's a referendum. The referendum turns out to validate that decision, the whole thing. And then a year from now or 2 years from now, the board says, you know what? they are crushing us in other municipalities. There's no boogeyman. Santa Claus isn't real. Like, we see what's happening. The illusion is broken of like, if we were to do this thing, our community would fall apart. Many have done it. Everyone's fine. Let's do it. And we decide to do it. At that point, maybe it's just you get, I guess, 3 people or 4 people or 5 that decide to opt in, and it's all the same. But my sense is that the kind of opposition that says, well, like, we got to wait. We haven't seen enough. We don't know. Like, how's that actually turning? It's only been a year. We actually don't know. Let's do the longitudinal studies. Let's wait. That's my sense of like of the moving of the goalpost. And so if I have a sense of like, all right, like, let's wait and see for these other consumption sites to open in similar communities, if any are actually going to do that. What are we, I guess, and that's where I'm least clear, what are we waiting to look for before we would say, and it's only people on the board that can speak for themselves, but for you to say, okay, I am comfortable with a consumption, it is proven, given the fact, and I said that because there are consumption sites across the country that you can look at right now that have been open for a long time. And you can see, well, what is the community like? What is the experience like? What is the result in the schools? What is it? You can actually look at what it looks like right now. You don't have to wait for a year or 2 or whatever for it to happen in Westchester. And so what materially are you looking for to be different, or what information are you looking for before you make a decision to know which way to go?
Well, me personally, I'm not worried about what other villages are doing. I'm worried about Ossining. So that's number 1. Number 2, I can't believe the revenue that would come out of that. What kind of fee structure they would have. What are they going to charge you, $10 to come in and smoke your pot? You know, what are we gaining? That's my point. I'm not worried about what other villages do. I just don't think it's a big revenue thing for us. I don't think we're going to get any pushback on it, to be honest with you. I don't think you're going to end up with a referendum on it. And I think people are more worried about having dispensaries more than they're worried about having somewhere to smoke it, because they're going to smoke it wherever they want to smoke it. And your argument with going down the street with kids, I get it. But let's take the guys that hang out on the corner and drink beer all the time every night. Do you walk your kid that way? No, you go the other way. Is it an inconvenience? Yes, but it's the way life is. So it doesn't hold water with me.
If we opt out of either one, there will be a referendum. That's not a choice.
No.
No, that's not.
No.
No.
The only way there would be a referendum if we opted out of lounges would be, and a special election, would be if people
Or if they did
mobilized
They have to
and
do a
did a
petition.
petition.
Or
Now,
if-
what
got
are
it,
the
got it. Or if we-
chances?
got it,
And it's a real high bar, that petition.
And
Yeah.
that would mean and that would be the group of people who actively are not on the fence.
Yeah.
They are actively saying, you opted out of the lounges, I'm just going to use colloquial language. You opted out of that, and I want you to opt in. Those are the people that have to get
Right.
a lot of signatures. They all have to be checked, and then we go into that.
Yeah.
I
So
think that would more likely happen with
The other-
If you don't want to cost the village money, you don't waive it.
Right. Okay. I'm clear now.
No,
Right.
so that was just a clarity about so I look at this a little bit differently, and I appreciate everybody's point of view, which is why I started with, even if one person on the board wants it, I think it's worth, because I like then to have the opportunity to have a public hearing about it. Because if we don't write it, we can't have the public hearing. So I'm more interested in the public hearing part, although many of us have formed, because we've been actually looking at this actively. I know each one of you has met with a number of people in the community advocacy group. I know that you've all been doing that. The public should know that. Kudos to all of you, and myself included, and we've spent time. We've been Googling, we've been looking, we've been calling friends in other states. So we've been doing some homework here. Where I come on this is that, my analogies are different, right? So my children have been with me in supermarkets that sell beer. Didn't make them drink beer any more or less than they would have otherwise drank. It is not, to me, the same analogy as drinking beer on the street and watching a couple of guys get drunk. And even if I did pass with them and they saw a couple of guys, my job would be, this is not how I want you to behave. I also don't want you to steal gum from the counter, and I also don't want you to do that. It assumes that you consider marijuana to be a drug. It is actually my belief that this legislation causes a totally seismic shift in the definition of marijuana. it is, over the long term, going to be, by the way of like not being considered really a drug, no more than NyQuil is a drug or aspirin sold over the counter. Because what in fact is being done is a redefinition of something that today is a drug that you don't want your kids doing and looking at. And in 20 years or 10 years, and that may seem like a long time, but in history it's not, that says this is like other things that I don't want my kids doing. Because I also don't want my kids smoking cigarettes. I saw what it did to my mother. So it's not really a drug. It's regulated. And I, as a parent, say to them, you see those people smoking cigarettes and they look really cool? I don't want you doing that. You see your father and I drinking wine on Friday nights with dinner? When you're an adult, you can do that. I don't want you doing that. I don't think it would make them drink less or more that I did that. And I think that's the category it gets put into. Why am I not in favor of lounges for now? Because when I started this journey, I was. I mean, Dana and I have had a few conversations about this. I simply don't know enough about them. And I have been to Europe and have been to what they call coffee shops in some places, highly regulated. So there's no question in my mind that it will be. Whether it's all in place now, I don't buy into the argument. Wait till it's regulated. It will be regulated. The one thing government does really well is set up commissions and regulate the heck out of everything. I have no worries about it being regulated and a commissioner being appointed and all the bells and whistles. We have no problem hiring people in New York State to regulate things. So I'm not worried about that. I think I don't know enough. And there are not enough hours in the day for me to fly and see and look and Google it. And I also am not sure that that's what I would like it to be in the next 5 to 8 years. I would like to have a dispensary so that people in Ossining do not have to travel somewhere to buy from a legitimate, well-known company or individual. And if I read the legislation right, it's heavily weighted for loans and marketing to people of color and women, if I'm not mistaken. And there are legal cases already starting about why that's reverse discrimination, but I don't care about that. That's not my problem. I'm not involved in the suit. I just know that it's a big deal for fairness and equity and all that. Let others figure that out. For me, the ability of people in this community to be able, adults, to be able to have access, to be able to open business. I also think from a zoning perspective, it is my desire to zone it, obviously like liquor. It's not in your school, it's not like a house of worship, but to minimize the number because we could always change zoning, which is what trustees do very well. I don't know enough about how lounges work to be at the forefront of it, and I have a hard time voting for things that I don't really have my arms around. And there are such mixed reports about them and who runs them and what happens. Look, I'm not a big fan of, bars that sprout and open and do all sorts of things. That's my personal value system. As far as what I do as a person representing the public, I think the dispensary allows for purchase. It allows for people to say, come on over to my house and, during my birthday party, this is legal. I'm growing some of this stuff and I'm smoking. It's all different than buying beer and going to a backyard or somewhere. And truthfully, the difference is you actually can't open a can of beer and drink with your friends legally, but you can actually smoke marijuana. But you actually have more room to do that with. Whether we like it or not is the same analogy I use for all the stuff I don't like. I don't like pornography, so I don't go with my children, even when they're adults, to watch pornography. It's my value system. Other people, I guess, have their own value system. I see it exactly the way beer and wine is sold in supermarkets. And in some states, like large amounts of wine, in addition to beer, not in New York, are sold in a large volume in supermarkets, and kids walk by there, it doesn't make them alcoholics.
If you
It
go to a
doesn't make them all that.
CVS in California, you can buy vodka, right? You can buy anything.
You could buy
You can
anything. Same thing with the
serious
state
liquor.
of Florida, same thing with many, many states. So from my perspective, it doesn't change the social structure. I think it allows for business. So I am actually for, now I could change my mind with the public meeting. I could change my mind. It's our prerogative. People that don't change their mind are people stuck in the mud, and it's a bad thing to never change your mind. Changing mind is a sign of growth in people. I have no issues about changing my mind. I see it as a strength, not a weakness. But based on conversations, if you want to know the leaning and where I've heard, I think that the courageous thing is to say, I know dispensary, that's something I think the community should have, that they shouldn't travel to, that it'll be finely regulated, I have no issues with that, and therefore I don't need to delay, because to your point, what are we waiting for? What's gonna happen in 2 years that I'm gonna learn from? What data are we gonna get in 2 years? With the lounges, I simply don't feel comfortable. Now, somebody may show up at the public hearing and say, let me make you feel comfortable. Here's 14 pictures of lounges, here's what the statistics look. I haven't found that on my own.
Well, I will say that the restaurants would benefit from lounges, because you'd have a lot of hungry people coming out of them.
And they're not allowed to sell food?
They can
I mean,
I don't think it.
Seriously, if I were going to open a lounge, I would open a restaurant right next to it. McDonald's would do very well, actually.
Different issue, because we're going to get about 14 emails about people who think obesity is the biggest problem in this country. So let's not go down all of the people's values and all that, because people have different. We're not all on the same. So that's sort of where I'm leaning with the footnote that says, if there's a public hearing and somebody comes up with something different, there's still time. But that's sort of where I'm leaning. So I think we have different opinions, a couple of different. So I think there is the.
I can be swayed, but right now,
Yeah.
I'm just not sure.
What will be drafted will be an opt-out of the adult use
Right.
of social consumption sites. Do I get a sense also from the board, though, that you are not looking to waive the referendum? You are not looking to waive the petition?
Correct.
Why, I'm sorry.
No, we have the option.
Opting out of the lounge.
We opt out, they could go to a petition. They have to get buku signatures to make this even happen, to make it come to a vote. If we decide to waive that, it automatically goes to that, costing us money.
Right.
I see what
So
you're
we
saying.
decide not to waive it, they have to do their footwork.
Right, and, we do permissive referenda, we have permissive referenda for bonds and things usually anyway. So if there's not a high likelihood that somebody's going to come out and challenge this.
So I think we're okay with Stuart putting it that way?
Yes.
Is that all right? Okay, so, great, I'll be watching, but I'm concerned that where I'm going, there will be other people from Ossining, and I do not want them showing up in my living room where I'm staying to watch us, which by law they could, so I will not be giving out my address. So I will just be watching but unable to vote. But I think we have a pretty good idea of where we're going with this, and we can keep talking about it. It's not over. Okay, that was the last item, I think.
That was the last item.
I think, Mayor, would be a motion to adjourn and go into executive session for matters of personnel.
So moved.
Second?
Everybody's good? Thank you, everybody. This concludes the meeting of July 28th, and we will, except for me, Deputy Mayor Casado will be running a meeting next week where we will be voting on some of these items. Have a lovely evening.